Okay, thank you. We've got both Joe and Catherine.
We'll call to order the Monday, March 17th meeting of the Grand Forks School Board. Our first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I ask you to stand as you are able. The flags are in the southeast corner of the room. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 1A, the reading of our school board meeting norms. Dr. Hodek.
Yes, be prepared, be on time, value and respect each other, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation, be professional at the board table and when visiting with the general public. Speak up when the norms are not being followed, advocate on behalf of students, and keep the community in mind.
Thank you. Before we move on to item 2, just a note, we have board member Joel Larson and Dr. Catherine Galach by phone this evening. Item number 2 on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. I would seek a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
It's been moved by Dr. Lund. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Manley. Any discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Lund,
Yes.
Flynn is absent. Palmasino,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Quevin,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. Item 3A, this will be celebrating success, Nathan Twining Elementary and Middle School. Mr. Chad Kurtika and team, take it away.
Good evening, everybody, and third time's the charm, I guess. Thanks for having us all. I really do want to thank Jess Borbert. She helped us really put our data together. When you're looking at data for Nathan Twining, it's really unique. We have our elementary school and our middle school. So depending on what platforms, you really have to dig and get some of that crucial data, split that apart. Of course, the staff that is here presenting, Lori Gangle, our literacy specialist, Kyle DeWitt, our instructional coach, and Laura Voorhees, our mental health specialist. And, you know, when you look at a team that's going to come and present, initially it was that week over our conference week. So we tried to keep the team simple, small, understand that we're going to have to give up some personal time. Now this is, you know, they're here tonight with us. Also want to thank my staff out at Twining. When you look at the data that this produces, that's a lot of hard work. We sit and have meetings where we really dive down to specific students, what this data means for those specific students, even getting students in the building. Have to obviously thank the Air Force Base community. They really do prioritize education. We feel that at our school, and it really is a very tight-knit community. So we will celebrate our Be Legendary data for the night. So Nathan Twining Elementary and Middle School SOAR. So the SOAR, we are safe, we are organized, we are accountable, we are respectful. Under that acronym falls all the other work that we do with our students and our staff. So as we kind of dive in, we're emotionally, mentally, physically strong. We're going to take a look at our demographics. We'll look at attendance and our PBIS goals, inputs, outcomes, ELA and our math analytics. And then at the end, just a few things that really do make Twining uniquely us, and kind of share a little bit of those success stories. So you look here, this is a great social studies activity that our teacher does, and there's a lot of pins. We have 32 different states pinned down there, over 10 countries. So when you think about the type of student that is at Nathan Twining, we have to understand they are coming from a lot of different experiences, not just educationally, but personally as well. Our elementary population is 211 students, just had someone come in the door, so as of Thursday, it'll be 212 in elementary. Again, unique demographics where, 61.6% white, 16.2% Hispanic Latino, 13.1% Black, 5.1% Asian, and then 4% others represented. So if we had populations of students in a subgroup under 10, we put them in others represented so they weren't easily identifiable. That looks much different than when we get to our middle school. Only 71 students, many of those subgroups, populations were less than 10. But again, still represents 35% of our student population, with 20% there of IEP and 504 students served. So to break down what our school looks like, again, 211 elementary, 71 middle school for a total of 282. In our elementary, that's 2 sections per K through 5. Where it gets really interesting is that middle school, where really right now we have 1 section per 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. Now, you do have to break that apart and make sure that in some of those classes, they are specifically where they need to be. But there are some, like our science class, that has that full section of students in there. You look at percentage of students receiving special ed services. 15% of our elementary students receive those special ed services. Middle school sitting at 13%. And again, looking at that representation, more than 10 countries represented by birth outside of the U.S. This was a point of data that when we met as a team, thought there was something that was just really unique to Twining. When you look at student mobility, so new to school students, when they come to us, and that percentage. So when you think, just this year, 39.3% of our student population in elementary was new to us. Now, we are all about relationships. If you're going to have any learning, those relationships have to happen. So that, when you look at a number like that, what are we doing as a staff to get to know those kids? What are we doing as a staff to get to know those families? And that's some of the data that we will dig into later. And you can see the trends. It's been as high as 42.5%. When you look at our middle school student percentages, it has been very high our last 3 years. Over half of new to us students to start the year. Now, again, it comes down, when you're a middle schooler, you really need that group. That's an important part of their development. So the work that our teachers do to make sure when those middle schoolers are coming in that intertwining time, so our advisor time, making sure that they're making those connections. It's just one way that we have to think about how do we get them to achieve, not only in English language arts, not only in mathematics, but then in our positive behavioral supports, but just how do we make them part of the Thunderbird community? So we're going to move on to our ELA and math data, but again, I think Grand Forks Public Schools has just made so many great strides in ensuring that every student has an equal opportunity to curriculum that is you can get in any of our buildings. So our Envision mathematics for our middle school, our everyday mathematics that we've had for a while now in our elementary, piloting Wit and Wisdom, and to see the conversations that our teachers, even in a piloting year, are having around literacy because of that curriculum is phenomenal. It's so much fun to see. Really great reading and our benchmark advance. So to dive into that ELA data, I'm going to invite Lori Gangle, our literacy specialist.
Hello, good evening. Okay, all of our ELA inputs are results of district initiatives, with the exception of our grant-funded initiative, that is down, initiatives, plural, at the bottom of the first column there. And those will be shared out towards the end of our presentation. So I'll jump around and touch on each of our inputs. So for our Tier 1 instruction, we're using district-adopted curriculum, and we work hard to make that solid, considering the mobility of our students especially. Then for our Tier 2 and 3 interventions, we're working to align more by using that same curricular resource and resources for our interventions. So that has come from our CIT department. Our leaders have shared that research is supporting using the same materials for all those tiers of instruction to help achieve better proficiency. Our targeted small group instruction, that is when a classroom teacher will pull back a small group or an individual and give them that additional instruction or opportunities for more practice or maybe an altered pace. And we're also having that same conversation to be using those same resources. The updated standards and proficiency scales, those have become available this school year in our district's digital grade level folders. So what some of our grade level teams have done is bring those documents into their intentional PLC conversations. So they will put those documents side by side with our curricular resources and look to see what are we teaching, when are we teaching, where are we teaching that, and then also triangulating that with our new report cards. So how are we assessing that and how are we sharing that out with our families? We have an instructional coach this year and we're pretty excited about that, and it's been wonderful to have that person in our building to help us deepen our reflection and focus. And it gives us that opportunity to zero in on areas of our teaching and refine our practice and be more effective in what we're doing. And as a result, that of course will affect our student proficiency as well. Our data digs, those are intentional times when we get to focus on our newest data collection after a district screening window. And then we can look at students through different lenses, so a whole grade level or a single classroom individually, and look at our instructional groups. So we're constantly looking at our groups and monitoring those and making changes. But after those screening windows, it gives us that time that we usually don't have to dig deeper into the data. CBM progress monitoring. So we're military connected, and we have that mobility piece of our students, and that's the norm. So when our new students come in, we not only capture that broad perspective of where they are in reading and math, but then we can also use those, and that's through the CAT data, the computer adaptive testing. But then we can use those CBMs that are available to us, and those are 1-minute probes, 1-minute screeners. And then that digs into the foundational skills. So our students most often are coming to us from far away, and we don't know what they've been exposed to in their previous curriculum or instruction. So those curriculum-based measures are quick and easy, get down to the foundations, and then help us determine those gaps in concepts that then we can target more precisely with our instruction, be more explicit, more targeted. For our Wit and Wisdom pilot, our elementary students, we have 1/3 of our students piloting currently, and then we're replicating in our building what many of our buildings are across the district are, as far as exposing our non-piloting teachers to start wrapping their head around what that's going to look like next year. So walkthroughs to look at artifacts in classrooms, giving them time for observations, having those conversations, and then teaching a module in the spring for everybody. And then also Wit and Wisdom is currently taught to all of our middle school grades, 6, 7, and 8. So, and a lot of that Wit and Wisdom is coming through our instructional coach, all the uploading that he's receiving this year, and then being able to schedule all of those things to work in our building. And then the last one I'll mention up there is the ELBA program, which I'm hoping you're all familiar with because it's about 40 years old. So the acronym is the Elementary Library Book Award, but there is another acronym that I kind of prefer myself, but it's called Everybody Loves Books a Lot. So that has been started and is run by our school librarians. So they curate a collection of 3 divisions of books, from picture books to chapter books. And then they challenge the kids to read all the books in a division. And staff do it as well. But it exposes kids to more diverse characters, to genres that they might not normally pick up. And we just put that on there as just a small piece that shows the importance of reading to our whole staff and how we want to build that in our students. Okay, so we'll take a look at some numbers. So these are our Be Legendary goals for elementary. So we have 2 years of baseline scores, and then our goal is to grow to the 65% proficiency rate by the year of 2028. And that is as measured by our North Dakota State Assessment, which is going to be called NDA+, or is called. And then what we do is we take that data and break it down into those grades that do test for that North Dakota State Assessment. So grades 3, 4, and 5 for elementary. So if you look on the chart on the right, there are 2 years of prior data, so 2021, 21, 22. And then that third year, 22 to 23, you can see our third grade classroom there met the district goal of 48%, but not our Twining goal of 59%. And then if you follow that same class diagonally down to the next school year, you see that they didn't meet either the district goal at 50%, they were 46, or our Twining goal of 60%. So interestingly, this is the class that would have been in kindergarten when COVID hit 2020, and then first grade for 2021. As you might expect, data is somewhat difficult for us to navigate sometimes because we have such a change in our student body from year to year and even within a year. But you can see that our Twining goals are 11% and 10% higher than the district school. And that's that. Let's go to the next one. Okay, here we take our state assessment scores on the top 2 lines, and then also our STAR reading scores, which have that turquoise header at the front, and then break our scores down into our student groups. So if we look at our reading scores for 2nd through 5th grade, we can see that all of our scores in those bottom 2 lines improve from fall to winter. And all scores are green except for 2 student groups. So the state goal, which you've heard in other presentations, is 50%. So that's the magic number that helps us have the foresight to see if our kids might be successful on that state assessment in the spring. And that's that indicator. So we're encouraged to see growth still in our red scores there. And we're especially excited about that last column where our IEP students quadrupled their scores from 6% to 24%. So now let's jump to middle school. So our Be Legendary data, our goal is to grow to 80% proficiency by the year 2028. And again, as measured by the North Dakota State Assessment. And then we break those scores down by grade level, so 6th, 7th, and 8th. And we have those 2 years of prior data for 2021, 21, 22. And then if you look at that third line, the year 22 to 23, the 6th grade met the district goal of 48%, they're at 67%, but not the Twining goal of 75%. And then that same class, if you follow them diagonally down to the next school year, they had the same result again by meeting the district goal, but not, they're just shy of the Twining goal. And then that was true that same year for our 6th grade class. For some perspective, our red scores, they're red, but they are 19 to 21% higher than the district goal. And then in the last column, if you compare our buildings goals of 75 and 76% to the district's goals of 48 and 50%, you can see that Twining's goals are half again higher than the district's goals. So even with our transient population, we're still exceeding the district's goals. And that's because our students dictate that, not because of us. So we're helping pull that district's percentage of where our students are at. So we work really hard to know our population because we know time is of the essence. So we know that we don't know how long we have with students, so we have to make every minute count when we're with them. And then in the next chart, we break down our data into our student populations, our student groups, and you can see that some years we've had enough that we can report out, and then others with our change in numbers drop below reportable scores. So if you look at those turquoise colored lines there too, at our star reading scores for middle school, and use them as predictors for success on that spring state assessment test, we can see that all of our percentages are green. And they're meeting the goal of 50% or higher for the state. And our lowest score there is 55%.
So, hello everybody, Kyle DeWitt, the instructional coach. We're going to dive into math now, and I won't belabor a lot of the data inputs that we have or inputs that we use for math in our elementary and middle school because they mimic and match a lot of what we do for ELA. Maybe not at the same intensity level, and you're going to notice that in some of the data that you're going to see in our mathematics, but you are going to see that they are fairly similar. Looking at the Tier 1 instruction, Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions, the updated proficiency scales and standards, the targeted small group instruction, and the use of data digs with student grouping and CBM progress monitoring. Some of the differences that one difference that we have is that we do have enrichment services that are provided through the district at our school once a week, and that's a service provided for students who are excelling in the areas of math in our elementary and who receive elevated levels of instruction for their area of performance. And then also grant-funded initiatives, which we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. So the same format that we looked at all of the ELA data, we'll look at the math data. So looking at our elementary, our K-5 Be Legendary data, and our goal is to go from 65% in 22-23 up to 70 by September of 2028, also using the NDA Plus as our measure for state. So looking at the data from elementary 3rd through 5th grade, we can see that in 2 years, again, just as Lori had mentioned, of data that wasn't a part of the Be Legendary, and then going down to 22-23, data listed for our elementary in mathematics. So again, working across the 50, 80, and 73, averaged out to 68, same kind of matching data points and numbers we have with ELA. That if they're green because they met district and our twining goals, but red is because they did not meet our twining goals. 2023, you can see though, 50% for that 3rd grade year, they did achieve the district goal above 40%. Working diagonally, you can see there was a significant drop from our 3rd graders in 22-23 to becoming 4th graders in 23-24, and then again in 22-23, our 4th graders becoming 5th graders in 23-24. As somebody who is new to twining, and somebody who is seeing this data for the first time, or even just not new to twining, this can be discouraging because it signifies that something has changed. Now, whether it is the demographics that we do serve that has changed, and we know that's changing, or something else, it's helpful because if we're going to set goals and we're going to progress monitor, then we need to look at the data because the data tells the story and provides the roadmap. So when we look at our declining scores from diagonally year after year, we know something is wrong. We know that there's areas of improvement for Tier 1, tightening up Tier 1, or targeted skill development in our Tier 2 and Tier 3. The encouraging part is that, again, at district-wide, they're just below the district standard, but discouraging, they are significantly below the twining goal. As Lori mentioned for ELA, our standards for, or our goals for math are also 20 to 25% higher than the district. Encouraging also, our 3rd graders from last year achieved very well on our NDSA. So, looking at our predictors, again in the exact same format we used ELA, we can see that there was growth in almost every single area from fall to winter, using that 50% benchmark to predict a 3 or a 4, or proficiency or advanced on the NDA Plus assessment. Again, highlighting our IEP students going from 13% to 36%, almost threefold as well. But also highlighting our Asian population going down from 40% to 27%. Again, data like this can be discouraging, but with the team that we have behind me and at Twining, it is encouraging because it provides us with an opportunity to grow. Looking at middle school now, our goal was to go from 40% in 22-23 to 52% in September of 2028. So again, looking at the data, 2 rows from NDSA that were not part of our Be Legendary to the 2 rows that are, we can see some numbers that are green. Of course, green in this instance means that they met our Twining goal, but not necessarily met our district goal. In 22-23, you can see that everybody except our 8th graders met our district goal, but not our Twining goal. The average, however, did meet Twining's and our district goal. Following all the trend lines diagonal, again, you can see some discouraging numbers. But I'll reiterate again, like I said before, data tells a story and provides the map. So with the team that we have at Twining, with Chad's leadership, with our middle school staff and elementary staff, me being brand new, we're excited to see where we can go, because what we've seen in ELA with the services that we can provide for literacy, we can do the same thing, at least on some scale, with math. And that's going to be a very targeted point of where this team and our school will look to moving forward. Again, looking at our predictors from fall, our star predictors from fall and winter, everybody improved from the fall predictor to winter. We've got some work to do in our entire, we just missed that 50% total by 1 percentage point, but our growth in our white Caucasian population was great. The thing that I do want to mention is that the 3 dots, as Lori had said before, those are just we have students in our building that do identify and report under those areas, but because the population is so limited, it's non-reportable data. So it's not like they didn't count, no, they did count, it's just that our population was so low, it's non-reportable. So that, in a nutshell, is our math and our ELA data from Twining and moving forward. I will now pass the microphone over to Mrs. Voorhees.
Hello. At Nathan Twining, we pride ourselves on fostering a holistic approach to student development. Our commitment to regular attendance ensures that students are well equipped for academic success. Through our PBIS program, we cultivate a positive and supportive environment that creates a safe and effective learning space by teaching positive behavior strategies. We integrate social-emotional learning through the Second Step program, which focuses on the 5 core competencies identified by CASEL. Additionally, programs like Sources of Strength and Zones of Regulation enhance our students' emotional and social skills, further promoting a positive school climate that supports our attendance. Our military-connected students at Twining demonstrate resilience due to the unique challenges that they face, such as frequent relocations and their parents' deployments. These experiences foster adaptability and essential life skills like coping, emotional regulation, and self-advocacy. Our Medal of Honor Character Development Initiative reinforces these values through a familiar military code. But what truly sets us apart is our commitment to attendance. We recognize that every day counts, every lesson matters, and every interaction shapes our future. So at Twining, we proactively monitor our attendance through PowerSchool. This information is seamlessly integrated into Panorama, which allows us to analyze and track attendance effectively. Panorama not only helps us identify opportunities for improvement, but it also ensures that every student has the support that they need to stay on track. We leverage Panorama to enhance our progress monitoring efforts, guide us in recommending targeted interventions, and provide a holistic overview of student engagement and development. Our daily attendance rate is a testament to our commitment. Our goal for elementary is to achieve a 95% attendance rate, and I'm proud to share with you that we are currently at 95.5% year-to-date. So as we look at our attendance data, we do see more than just numbers. We see the heartbeat of our community pulsing with unique rhythms of military life. Our attendance story is painted in broad strokes across the canvas of the school year, with certain months standing out in yellow. September often marks the beginning of a difficult period for our students, as their parents often prepare for deployment and they'll take leave to spend these precious moments with their families. Then comes the month of October. This adds depth and complexity to our attendance picture. As the leaves change outside, so too does the composition of the classroom. October marks the beginning of a new deployment cycle, and we see this reflected in our data. Some seats will remain temporarily empty as families prepare for this separation, while others fill with students whose parents have just returned. It's a time of transition, painted in shades of anticipation and adjustment. The holiday season, you will also see, brings its own unique palette to our attendance at Canvas. We will see dips in the data as families seize precious moments to reunite with the loved ones across the world. These absences, while challenging from an educational standpoint, paint a picture of strong family bonds that are the backbone of our military community. So just as our elementary students have shown remarkable dedication to attendance, our middle school students are following suit. Our middle school goal is also to achieve a 95% attendance rate, and I'm proud to share that we are currently at 96.1% year-to-date. So this high level of attendance is a testament to the strong sense of community and commitment to learning that exists across all grade levels at Twining. And again, you will also notice that common theme where specific times of the year correlates with our military mission at Grand Forks Air Force Base. At Twining, we understand that attendance is not just about showing up. It's about being present and engaged in the learning process. Our commitment to attendance is reflected in our overall attendance rates, but we also closely monitor the chronic absenteeism to ensure that every student has the opportunity to succeed. Chronic absenteeism is missing more than 10% of enrolled school days. This year, our elementary school, we have a chronic absenteeism rate of 13%, which translates to 29 out of 215 students. When comparing our current rate to this time last year, we see a notable improvement. Our 10-day moving average has decreased by 6 percentage points, indicating that our efforts to support students and their families is yielding positive results. So as we continue to focus on attendance, let's examine the trends across different grade levels. Here, we look at chronic absenteeism rates for our elementary students. Last year, our kindergarten rate was lower. However, this year we have seen the increase of 24%, which does represent a 16% rise from the previous year. However, in contrast, our first grade students have shown remarkable improvement. This rate has decreased from 24% to 16%, marking an 18% reduction. Our second grade students have also seen a decrease in their chronic absenteeism. From 29% to 13%, this is a 16% reduction. Our third grade students have shown remarkable improvement this year. Their rate has dropped to just 3%, which is a significant decrease of 23 percentage points from the previous year. And as we move up to fourth grade, we do see a little bit of a different picture. Here the rate stands at 22%, which represents just a slight increase of 3 percentage points from last year. In fifth grade, we're seeing a rate of 12%. This is up by 2 percentage points from the previous year as well. Our fourth and fifth grades show a small increase that we are keeping a close eye on to ensure that all students, regardless of their grade level or family circumstances, have the support that they need to maintain a strong attendance and achieve academic success. So now let's look at the middle school data. This year, our chronic absenteeism rate stands at 8%, which means that only 6 out of our 71 middle school students have missed more than 10% of their enrolled school days. So what's even more heartening is the progress that we've made compared to last year. When we look at this 10-day moving average, we see a 2 percentage point improvement from the same time in 2023 to 2024 school year. Taking a closer look at our middle school data, we can see the rate for our sixth graders stands at 5%. And interesting, this rate has remained stable, showing no change from last year. In seventh grade, we see a rate of 12%. This represents just a slight increase of 2 percentage points from the previous year. And out of all middle school grade levels, 8th grade students have shown the most improvement in their attendance. Their rate is just at 8%, which marks a decrease of 9 percentage points from the last year. So as a school serving military families, we understand that factors such as deployments, relocations, and other unique challenges can impact our attendance. Moving forward, we are committed to continuing to analyze these trends in panorama and to continue to celebrate our success. At Twining, this information is not just data. It's a badge of honor that reflects our dedication to learning and our belief in the power of resilience and the unique strength of our military-connected community. Thank you.
So I'll come back to the mic now, and I'll talk about what our PBIS, or Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, as well as our SEL, Social Emotional Learning programs look like at Twining. So they're all centered around, as Mr. Katika stated, SOAR, which is safe, organized, accountable, and respectful. When I came on board, Mr. Katika presented to me the desire that he wanted staff committees, the recommitment to having staff and staff voice drive the changes and the initiatives that happen at Twining. And so we formed our PBIS committee initially this year with 9 members. Since then, it has grown to 12 members, which includes our entire mental health team and representatives from our special ed department, our primary K-2, our intermediate 3-5, as well as our middle school 6-8. We've done a lot of work to bridge the gap between how we celebrate success in our elementary and in our middle school to be a unified process, not a separate process. Some of the inputs that we have for our PBIS and SEL include our part-time counselor, Ms. Kelsey Yanish, our part-time social worker, which is Chantel Bergquist, our mental health specialist and SEL specialist, Mrs. Laura Voorhees. We have a military family life counselor, or an MFLAC. We also provide Tier 1 instruction, which is our second step program, and Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions, which we'll speak to in a little bit. Our PBIS programming is also based on a military-connected program called the Medal of Honor Character Education. Medal of Honor Character Education is based on the pillars of the military family and the military life, which are courage, integrity, patriotism, citizenship, commitment, sacrifice, leadership, and perseverance. We recognize this and celebrate these things through monthly Monday and Tuesday morning openers. So again, when we come together as a staff to talk about behavior and creating a community where it doesn't matter where you were born, it doesn't matter where you're coming in from, you belong. We center it around SOAR, and all of our students at every single assembly and within their classrooms recite our pledge. And what SOAR means in action is that safe, we will act in a way that protects ourselves and others. We are organized, we will be with our class, we will take turns and take care of our belongings. We will be accountable. We will take pride in our actions, knowing and doing what is right, and we will be respectful. We will be kind and helpful to others as well as to ourselves. This is what we commit to behaviorally, academically, on the playground, in every aspect of our building. And it's not just our students, it's our staff as well. This is a pledge for our entire building. We have our class or our expectation posters or our these are our expectations or our standards in common areas around the building that all fall in line with SOAR. So if you walk across the grid for classroom hallways and lunchroom, that's what it means for our students to be safe, what it means for our students to be organized, accountable, and respectful. The same thing with bathroom, playground, and arrival and dismissal, what it means to be these things in action in our building. So how do we recognize when students are doing the right thing? Classic PBIS strategy is that we provide some tokens. Initially, our tokens are called lightning strikes. So these are given frequently when a student is recognized doing something that is in line with SOAR. They are collected at the end of each week by our middle school student leaders, and they could lead to small celebrations and recognitions within individual classrooms, but no matter what, a student knows that when they receive a lightning strike, it goes towards a total goal for our entire school, which leads to a school-wide celebration. We aim to have one school-wide celebration per quarter. Last quarter, we did take Mr. Katika to a gym wall. Most excited the kids have ever been. We also have bigger pictures. So the idea that when a student goes above and beyond what it means to SOAR at Twining. So these are called Thunderstruck cards. These are recognized at assemblies. Students who win these get a special turn at spinning a wheel to earn even a bigger prize. And they are also a source of good news calls to parents by Mr. Katika. Our minimum goals have one of these given to every single student per year, and that's a minimum. We encourage our staff frequently to give out more when they see it. So more student recognitions. These are our Monday and Tuesday morning openers. We worked really hard to get our middle school and elementary on the same page for celebrations. However, in this aspect, it didn't quite work. So the Monday of each week, the first Monday of each month, we have a Monday morning opener, which highlights our Medal of Honor Character Ed program, and then a Tuesday morning opener, which is the same thing for our middle schoolers. Every one of these assemblies is opened up with the Thunderbird Pledge. It is centered around our Medal of Honor Character Development program. Monthly character pillars that I read earlier are highlighted, and these are led by student presentations, one per grade level, and then put into practice for the entire month. We also have school pride initiatives at work with these school-wide celebrations, and we always close with our school song. The additional student recognition are Thunderbird rallies. This is an entire K-8 rally and celebration. This is where we recognize our students of the quarter on the academic level, where our middle school athletes are recognized, where our middle school arts and theater are recognized, and where staff and student competitions are held. These are also, both the MMO, TMO, and these Thunderbird rallies are great opportunities to re-invite our military family back into our building and kind of erase the stigma of having people in your buildings that COVID presented. And it's been really fun to see families back in our building. Next, what we did as a committee is we put together, with the help of some pre-work done by our mental health team, the Twining behavior flowchart. And what this does, and it's super small on the projection, so I understand that's going to be hard to read, but what it does is it carefully organizes what we recognize as level 1 or level 2 behaviors that go against what SOAR means and what our character of honor words mean. And then it also outlines how staff respond and how parents are notified. It then, on the right side in the red, are bottom line behaviors, what we call level 3, level 4, what they are in specifics, and then how they are dealt with as a staff and as a team of responders when certain specific, intense, or elevated behaviors occur. There are also areas of interventions at the bottom for minor behaviors, but more importantly, it also highlights a retooled or redesigned MTSSB process where we work as hard as we can as a mental health team and as an organizer to get ahead of certain behaviors. When a behavior happens, getting it documented in Panorama, knowing what the teacher is doing intervention-wise, was it successful, was it not successful, filling out the MTSSB form, which is also in Panorama, and then having one of our mental health team address it initially. That way, we don't have to bring it to an entire team of ideas and people because the behavior hasn't worked. We can address it on a smaller, earlier scale so that if behavior increases to a point where the interventions that we have been trying have not worked, we have data that shows it doesn't work, here are our next steps to intervene and to help. All of this is outlined, and our staff has had multiple trainings on it, and the implementation of it has been well received and successful at Twining. So to talk about interventions, these are interventions that are input in Panorama. At the time this data was collected, we had 28 plans in place. Of the 28, 20 of them were marked successful. 71% had met their goals because of this MTSSB process and this way, the way that we've outlined intervening in behavior. A lot of this revolves around Castle's SEL, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. But a lot of it has to do with the hard and tireless work of our mental health team. On the right side, you'll also see completed plans with goals per grade level. And just shows a bit of a breakdown as to how many plans we have per grade level. And then those that are successful are in blue. Those that are still ongoing or have not met goal are in black. So what makes us uniquely us?
Thank you, team. That's phenomenal. So what makes us uniquely us? Well, separate but united, a coterminous school, right? So school boards, the amount of work that you all do along with our Grand Forks Air Force Base School Board, very, very thankful for. 100% military connected aside from staff children. Now, those staff students that come is just one more way to retain quality educators at Twining and entice them, hey, you want to be a part of this community. Finding ways to include military involvement. Now, if you come to our school to start the day, I'm lucky enough to have security forces at the start of our school zone and at the end of our school zone. Their lights are on. Those students will be safe coming to our school. Now, those same security forces have come into our building and have done a lot of fun in activities with our students. So just one of our last Thunder rallies, I noticed how many parents were in there, and during our staff versus student activity, we decided to take it up a notch and do staff versus parents. Some of those parents were a little reluctant to participate, but they had a blast. Our team time for our middle school staff. So with a middle school, as small as we have, you have multiple disciplines, multiple grade levels, for one teacher teaching. So that just essentially means they are prepping for more students across different disciplines, where a lot of teachers in town would have their one level of grade in their one specific discipline. And then, looking at having a part-time counselor, social worker, supplementing with a mental health specialist, now with a grant. But then, we had to be really intentional with how we scheduled that. So this year we went to a move towards having a counselor Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and our social worker Tuesday, Thursdays. Again, some trade-offs with that where they're not in the building at one time. So sometimes communication, you really have to be intentional and ensure that all those small communication pathways that make a big difference are happening. I'm not going to go into this a whole lot, but just one thing that makes us uniquely us are our DODEA grants. So at the bottom there, Project Heroes, that is sunsetting for our focus on our STEM and military connected students. Project FIT, which is promoting academic achievement through movement, but also for our teachers, they are getting some movement and mental health out of that. And then Project BIT, which is going to help us with our social, emotional, and student behavior, some of the things that Kyle was just talking about. So our STEM grant was just sunsetting this year, has involved a lot of different things, mainly that teacher education. With a new STEM or science curriculum, we were able to bring in fact, we are bringing in more training tomorrow for all teachers. And it's much smaller. It's a one-on-one or two-on-one application. They get to dive into real-world STEM connected classroom concepts, life applications. If you walk into one of these lessons, they are getting dirty, they're hands-on. Even the labs that they are doing these experiments in are part of this grant. And really the impact is just strengthening that STEM culture, benefiting that military connected student, and knowing that STEM is a very high priority among this population. And there they are, just getting down and dirty, having a great time in our STEM lab. Project FIT. Now, we have some great benefits for our staff. A collaborative space. Feels like a coffee shop, but it allows them to come in, collaborate, lesson plan. Extra gaming room. If any of you ever come out to Twining, you need to take a look at this extra gaming room. It's a way to get movement in a lot of different ways. It can utilize academics, but then there's exercise bikes. There's a tap wall just for hand-eye coordination that I know Mr. Baki and myself went toe-to-toe one time. I'll have a rematch anytime. But then community events, and I think that's really where we've seen the payoff. We had a color run last year that really made an impact on the community. And when you're talking about the different squadrons coming in and supporting it, our fire department, security forces, but it was beyond that. There was a couple of families that have come and talked about the impact that specifically had on their family. So again, our outcomes, 10,205 minutes of targeted interventions using that extra gaming room. Strengthen community ties. That's been a huge goal of mine. I want to be a part of that community. And then sustainable classroom tools like reading bikes, active learning equipment. And there you go. That says it all. That's why we do it right up there. Then the grant that is just taken off right now is our Project BIT. behavior intervention at Twining. So again, goal of building a positive school climate, reduce that behavior issues, improve academic performance. And again, that's going to take us into 2029. We're lucky. The budget breakdown is almost half of it's going to personnel, because with these grants, if you don't have someone to run them and work in them, they really won't be successful. All the data we showed you tonight takes an awful lot of personal commitment from our staff. It takes an awful lot of time, and it takes a lot of man and woman hours. We want our students to succeed. So thanks for letting us share our Be Legendary data. Thanks for letting us celebrate our successes. Do we have any questions?
Any questions from board members? Dr. Lund.
I've noticed through the years in my day job that there's some variation in what and when things are taught across this country and from state to state. So from Texas to South Carolina. I'll give you an example. So last week I was seeing a patient and I asked him, I said, well, how's your math going this year? He's in middle school, not at Twining, but somewhere else. And he said, oh, it's really easy because I learned this last year in California. I'm wondering how much, you've got, in middle school, you got 50% new students. How much of that is an issue for kids that have already learned something or haven't even been exposed to it? And then how do you all adjust to that?
Yeah, and that really is going to using our computer adapted tests and our CBMs to look at where they are specifically at, as well as looking at, their transcripts when they come in. But that then too we have to provide more options specifically in middle school. So, what does that look like? We do have some smaller class sizes in a class like geometry because military compact dictates that they have the right to that class. So it gives us some unique challenges to work around, but we do have to be very cognizant of it, specifically in middle school. But again, in elementary, we're doing the same thing. When they come in, we're giving them that computer adaptive tests, those CBMs that are just those 1-minute quick hits of what are your skills, so that teacher can hit the ground running. Because again, we don't know if we have them for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 4 years, and we want to really impact not just that student, but their families as well. They notice it. Thank you.
Other questions from board? Dr. Hodek.
I'm going to kind of piggyback off of Dr. Lund there. What interests me here is the fact that you're going to get all these transient students. And in most school districts, most states, you have standard curriculums, and you also have state standards that are often embedded in those curriculums. So is there something out there that's an avenue that goes towards looking at the different curriculums around the different air bases where these students might be coming from? So a school in Minot and their curriculum versus our curriculum. Then if you even go to other states and other countries and such, is there any way that you are able to look at that curriculum or be able to discuss it, conferences together, anything like that?
So there isn't a specific program or specific outline for that. In fact, it was a conversation I had at a DODEA conference where I was with a principal outside of a mini session, and we were talking the same thing. Now, we do make calls when there are instances where we're finding big discrepancies in their learning, make a call to the former school. And again, sometimes those calls are met really well. And sometimes, depending on where that school is, they really don't take that time. But again, it's us reaching out. But that is a very good point, and it's something we try and dial down more to, just not really well outlined now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hodek.
Others? Yep, Mr. Clevin.
Thank you. Are you going to present this to the District 140 board?
We haven't been asked to yet. I could easily and would be happy to.
I think they'd probably appreciate hearing as much as we do. And then just a commendation for being able to matriculate all those new students constantly. That is a remarkable achievement. And I love what you said about the students being resilient and adaptable to the change. That is a tremendous character attribute to those young people. So them and their parents should be very proud of that. And your work helps that. So thank you.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed my 2 years now that I've been out there, and I've learned a lot, and it's really humbled me. And again, I'm blessed to be able to serve that community.
When we celebrate the month of the military child, oftentimes the T-shirt. When we celebrate the month of the military child in April, oftentimes we will have a dandelion on our shirt because a dandelion can prosper almost anywhere.
Ms. Flynn, did you have something?
I have the privilege of being a Twining alumna, and I think while you attempted to share the story of Twining, you don't quite know until you're really in it. And, you know, I'm sure, Kyle, you probably had an idea, but, you know, until you're there working, you see it in a little different way. So when we talk about resources and kind of this uniquely us, and I usually ask this question to the other schools that present, but sometimes it might be more difficult for you to tell us what resources you need, because it may not be just alike. You know, you get the privilege of having access to certain resources that maybe the schools in town don't with the military grant funding. We saw some reductions in how we deliver enrichment in town, but, you know, the Air Base School has a little bit of that. And so there's some things that maybe you don't have that, you know, the schools in town don't. But if you could maybe tell us something on your wish list that would be important for us to know specifically about what Twining needs, that maybe you don't have access to resources for right now, what would that be?
I'd say 100% people, and specifically our mental health team. When I share a counselor and I share a social worker, when I was at Discovery just after COVID, we invested our money in ensuring that we had full-time counselors and full-time social workers, because we know the impact that has. So when you look at students and our populations of students coming in, the amount of work that mental health team has to do to not only ensure that they're coming in, they're comfortable, ensuring that we're meeting our goals of attendance, but again, just addressing all the little needs. If we have a student that has a mom or dad deploying, you know, a lot of those little things. So anytime I'll say personnel, even, you know, you look at my budget breakdown there, I maximized as much as I could put in there for a person.
Okay, thank you.
Others? Mr. Larson, you're on the phone. Anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm sad that I missed being there in person to see Principal Gerticka. But I'm glad I got to hear how well he and the team are doing. And just looking at I think it was slide 4, with all the parts of the country and the world where these kids and these families are coming from, I just feel like we as a board and a community are lucky to have Chad, with his kindness and empathy and how much he cares about people, being sort of the face of us, the face of North Dakota, to welcome these folks into our community. And I just think that we're lucky. And so thank you, Chad and team. Keep it up. Thanks.
Thank you, Joel.
Anything else? I'll just close by saying 2 key things that haven't been stated. Just 2 commendations, 2 thank yous for listening to the data and for seeking continuous improvement. It shows and it matters. So thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Item 4 on our agenda is the public comment period. We're about to enter into the public comment period for our meeting. Although state law does not require us to hold a public comment period, we have chosen to do so because we believe it is crucial for us to hear from our community members about their concerns and issues. Having said that, please note that the board is here to listen. The public comment period is not designed to be a discussion. Accordingly, please do not expect board members to respond to your concerns or questions now. This is because we take your concerns and questions seriously and want to have sufficient time to process and research issues if need be. We will, however, respond to your questions and concerns at a future meeting or have proper staff get back to you at the appropriate time. I also want to point out that under state and federal privacy laws, we are unable to entertain any comments or questions about school district personnel. Please know, however, that we take personnel concerns very seriously. On these matters, we would ask that you would go through the appropriate administrative channels. Finally, we recognize that right now in our nation and in our community, we are polarized on a number of issues. That said, we want our school board meetings to serve as an example to our students that members of our school board and members of our community can deal with controversial issues in a civil manner and demonstrate mutual respect for one another. In that spirit, we will insist that all speakers and members of the audience maintain civility and respect for any divergent views that others possess. We ask speakers to please address their comments to the board directly. Finally, I want to remind everyone listening that you may submit written comments to the board in lieu of speaking during the public comment period if you so choose. The board will now entertain public comments. Each individual speaker is allotted up to 3 minutes. At this time, I have one public comment card. Are there any others? If so, please bring them up now. I have Mr. Clark Pepcorn.
I'm Clark Pepcorn. I'm part of the committee that's helping redraw the school lines. I have been. I've got a couple kids. The background is they both went to Kelly, went to Schrader, one went to Central, one went to Red River. I'm currently in the Red River District. I'd like to consider myself impartial in this process. I'll start out with the elementary schools and some things that we did. As we know, some of our elementary schools are underutilized and some that are busting at the seams. One of the things we looked at pretty specifically was that making sure kids don't travel over major thoroughfares. Currently, that's not always happening. The other thing is we tried to make sure that all the kids going from an elementary school are going to the same middle school. At the middle school level, we tried to make it where only one of our current 3 middle schools gets split between the 2 high schools. We felt this is very important. Kids develop lifelong friendships at this age. In our map, it would be the new Valley Middle School. At the high school level, that's where you saw the biggest change, right? First of all, I'd like to challenge all board members to drive the current boundary lines and see if you think it's a true representation of our city. I'll be surprised if you're not shocked at the discrepancies. In the current boundary line, Central's newest housing area is the Burdick Addition. It's already 25 years old. In the current boundary line, it would hard to even build a new house in the Central District. As a committee, we looked at the current boundary lines that have kids living 4 blocks from Red River that are in the Central District. As a committee, we said no. According to public information provided to the committee, going back to home sales from October 1st of last year, back a year, of the top 100 valued homes sold in Grand Forks for that year, 96 of the 100 were in the Red River District. 99 of the 100 lowest valued homes were in the Central District. We should be ashamed that as a district we've allowed this to occur. Are we okay as a community having our schools with such a drastic contrast in real estate valuation? Our committee said no. Are we okay as a community having one school where there's no development occurring or even planned to occur? Our committee said no. As a community, are we okay with someone who lives in the southeast part of town, asking them to commute an additional 2 minutes to get to their high school? We said yes. Do I think we need different representation on this committee? Yeah. We need some school board members. Sherry, I agree with you. We need to somehow remove the emotion. We have great schools in our community. As a community, we decided that drawing that boundary line for the high school, going everything east of Washington and north of the Merged to Columbia, it's the simplest, most logical, and safest for all that are involved. One that works for our future. Let's not keep kicking the can down the road. Let's do something meaningful. Thanks for allowing me the time. Thanks for allowing me to be part of the committee. I'd love to visit with any and all of you.
Thank you. Item 5A, Demographer's Enrollment Analysis. Right to Rob Schwartz.
Now it's on. Good evening. I think we need a larger podium up here. Put that in. All right, so thank you this evening to have your time to give you some background information on your enrollment, demographics, and developments that all lead its way into the conversations that we've had about future boundaries. So tonight I have two pieces of information. I'm first going to go over the enrollment analysis, and then we'll dig into some of the things that you all requested at the last board meeting that I was with you. For context for everybody, we've been working in North Dakota, specifically Grand Forks. We exclusively work with school districts. You see a list of some of our team up there. Again, our focus is how do we create solutions through the use of our data that's happening in your district. In this report, I will not go over, I think there's roughly 75 pages. Could you imagine that would be over an hour of me talking just about enrollment? I want you to dig in and use this resource that when people start to say, hey, I think there's this happening with demographics or this with development, you have a tool by which you can go to help them understand what we've discerned looking at your data. Generally speaking, this report is broken up into 4 parts. The first is your enrollment and demographics. Part 2 is the development. Part 3 are the projections. And then Part 4 is our next steps. Page 5 is all you need to know in this entire report. This tells you what's happening with your enrollment. We believe you're going to continue to increase by about 200 students over the next 5 years. If we kept our existing boundaries, we've listed off some of the buildings that would have issues based on the reside projections or the attend projections, or in some case, both of them. I'll talk a little bit about that as we get to the projections portion. And then thirdly, we have development predominantly in the south. We're still watching stuff that's up by the Walmarts. We could see some things there. And so there's some things that may happen that's atypical of what we've been seeing with the growth move south, right? So that's generally what's happening in your district. So everything has geography. Everything that we look at with our data ties back to the geography. We zoom into the city limits. You'll see the full extent of the district in the bottom left-hand portion of all the maps. So again, it's much larger than where we zoomed in, but most of the action is what's happening in the city of Grand Forks. You'll see our existing elementary attendance areas, middle school attendance areas, high school attendance areas, and then ultimately how we model looking down to a smaller subset, planning areas, smaller than census blocks, small enough that we can look at even the parcels of what's happening with the data to understand what that means in future years. All of that ties back to this model. Every single map, every piece of information that I'm sharing with you tonight somehow ties back to this statistical forecast model. So as I get to the end of this, you can consider yourself experts in statistics if you understand what I'm talking to you about with the solutions. Understanding that model just in simplistic terms is what's on page 13. So when our projections are either over or under, come back to some of this information. For instance, one of the things we don't know, what will be the impact of tariffs on how fast housing is built? What will be the impact of mortgage interest rates? We've seen them decline a little bit. That creates more affordability of whatever is up for sale. What does it mean as the value of homes increase? All of these things, some we can kind of speculate. Some of this we can tie to some known variables. Other things, it's a wait and see. Everyone would have to speculate to what your expertise is. We always talk about live birth information. This is the largest variable for us to have an understanding of future kindergarten classes. What you see here is Grand Forks County's live birth data from 2009 through 2023. you'll notice that we've had 4 consecutive years under 900 live births. That has an impact on the number of kindergartners that we can have in the future. What would need to happen for us to be on the high side, that orange part of what we're labeling in those columns, the far right column, we need to have a greater market share of live births that were born 5 years previous, or we need to have families that are moving into our community have children that were not here and not in the live birth data. So things that relate to a subdivision life cycle. Some of that visual, same information, but maybe more of an infographic here on page 15. One of the things that we found a little bit concerning that may be an anomaly of census data is in this bottom visual. So we're showing you 2 different things. You have to look at the y-axis for live births on the left-hand side, and then the right side is population under 5 years. So we're looking at census data, we're looking at live births, and what we really want to see is that the population of under 5 would be greater positive separation from our live births. This gives us an understanding with census data that there's a lot more kiddos out there that would be coming into our system. Right now, it's kind of a little bit of a Heckle and Jekyll type situation here. What's happening in the community with households and the number of children that they have under the age of 5 is something that, again, we're trying to fully understand. There's some gaps, I believe, in what this information might mean. When we look at your enrollment by grade, the top thing that I want you to look at on page 16 is our senior class. So when I look at 23-24 school year, take that row, go out to the senior class, it's 546. When I come down to the kindergarten class here in 24-25, it's 587. Having that positive growth from a senior class graduating to an incoming kindergarten class helps give greater certainty that we should grow. That's one aspect that we look at. The other is this cohort change. So simply stated, how does a grade change over time? When I see black numbers, which are the majority of your numbers across the row from 23-24 to 24-25, that leads us to have a variable that says you should grow because we're seeing positive growth. Is that related to the Air Force Base? Is that related to the university? Is that related to the general economic conditions here in Grand Forks? And the answer is yes, all of the above. The other thing that I want you to look at on this visual is if you go up the columns, this gives you an understanding of a trend, what happens from grade to grade. 10th to 11th, look at that grade. We typically lose students, but you've seen the last couple years, it's under 10 students. So remarkably better than what we've seen in years past. I can't tell you the specific reason of the why. We just see it in the data. A lot of times this gets into things related to credit recovery for high school credits. Sometimes it could be special education and how we reclassify them based on where they are in their academic progression. But generally, that is a positive trend that we've seen that decrease in the number of loss that we see. So that's a positive. And again, most of the grades show a growth. Intra-district transfers. This is a piece that you'll want to come to that gives you an understanding of, with our existing boundaries, how are kids potentially making some different choices. Some of these choices might be the household. Some might be where your programs are, right? We have different programs in buildings that are not in different buildings. So take that into account as we look at this. But this shows you the flow of students based on where they reside and where they're actually attending. This helps us understand that when we create a boundary, there's still some flexibility. And if we talk about our 2 pieces of the high school, you get into some of the specific choices of understanding why are they making that. Is it athletics? Is it activities? Is it where their parents are teaching, right? And that even drills down even into the elementary level. So again, this gives you that flow, even with the secondary, to understand that there is some opportunities for students where they can go to different buildings. We also look at migration, so the movement of students. So I loved hearing about I didn't like hearing how much transiency there was at Twining, or Twining. but that's throughout your entire district. We see a lot of movement of kids, right? So what this is visualizing for you here is the green bars represent where students were there the previous year as K through 11, but then as 1st through 12th graders the next year, they left the district. Again, I don't know the reasons why they left the district, but we know they're no longer there because that unique student ID is not being served. The orange part represents who's new to the district. So the previous year they were not here, and then they are in that particular year. So what we try to understand here is what's the trend data indicating to us? Well, we see some positives. Look at that out-migration of elementary over the last 3 years. It's dramatically reduced. That's influenced why when we look at our net migration being a positive of over 100 students, a lot of that's related to the decline of the out migration that we see at the elementary level. What's good about that, if I think about this from a forecasting perspective, is if we reduce the outflow at the elementary, that means we maintain more kids in the system, and as we move forward, that creates a wave of more kids that then move from elementary into middle school into high school. So again, that's just one piece to understanding what's happening with your enrollments. We've also analyzed those students where their address is not within the district boundary, and it's clearly declined over the last 6 years, where we were roughly at 190 and it's now at 140. And you can see that breakdown in that bar by elementary, middle school, and high school. And then you can see the top 3 districts where those students that we're receiving outside of the district into our district for services in the brick and mortar worlds. We also had some information about homeschool student analysis and how they might be served, whether it was in the brick and mortar or homeschool. Again, this is an interesting aspect. Again, we're trying to understand how are people making some choices as we change what the modality is that the students can receive their services from. We also did some analysis on your ELL or MLL student population to show that in 2021, about 4% of our enrollments qualified for those services. Here in 24-25, it's over 6%. So quite a bit of an increase. The services that those students need in those buildings is uniquely different. That gets into some of our capacity challenges that at the committee level, we had quite a bit of conversation that there's different things that happen in these buildings, and as we have these opportunities to move these students into a neighborhood school, there's the ability for how those students receive services to be a little bit different and to be maybe more positive than what they're experiencing now. Next few pages give you some visuals of what's happening at that planning area level. So on this page, where is a planning area increasing or decreasing? Orange is an increase, green is a decrease. This changes year to year as people move in and out of the district or move in and out of different housing inventory. Where our students are based on the students being geocoded are represented here. The darker the red, the greatest density of students. So again, take some time and study some of those maps. Overall, we think there's positives with our enrollments. We do want to watch what's happening with the live bursts, because that is one of our variables that gives us a window into understanding the future of what we could see for kindergartners. So then we transitioned into enrollment from now into development. This one visual on page 28 is to help you understand, is there a correlation, is there a connection to a overall population change? So census population, which is the green line, a dramatic change when we had the decennial census. I reported this to you last year, so you shouldn't be alarmed. We still have more people moving into the community, but it's at a lesser rate with the newer decennial census data, and then how they move forward with their aggregates of population change. The blue line represents our certificate of occupancies, different than building permits. This is when we can actually move into that housing. So when can we actually have people there, and when does that actually translate into having students? We can see that that's, with the current data, seems like, wow, we've really gone down. We anticipate with when data gets registered with the county, some of that will come up a little bit, but it's not going to go towards some of our years where we've had close to 300 or more units. The red line represents our actual enrollment headcount change year to year, and so that's above zero for 2 consecutive years, indicating, again, we're starting to see the impacts of new development and households that have school-age children and people in the community continuing to choose Grand Forks for their education of their students. Demographic summary, so you can understand who is the typical person in our school district boundary. Use this for some of your grants, just your understanding of what's happening in your community. It's census data for the most part. When we look at yield rates for the type of developments, here we're focused on elementary, K-5, and we're looking at, for every 100 units, how many K-5 students do we generate? Stayed pretty similarly when I look at that district row of 17, went up to 18, and now it's back to 17. And when you look during this time period, we built over 800 single-family units. So it's really nice that we've stayed the same, and that's partly why we're seeing the growth that we've seen over this last decade. The shading, as we're showing this by each elementary building, is where it would be greater than that district average by more than 3, it's going to be in orange. And if it's lower than that district average by more than 3, it's in the green. So we have quite a few of our attendance areas that are currently under what that district average is. And no surprise, where we're seeing the bulk of our growth, guess what? We're exceeding what that yield rate is. Typically, new, shiny units drive having more kids initially. When we look at our multifamily, we've built a lot of multifamily in this time period, over 2,000, right? But not all of these units have enough bedrooms for us to have families. And so we yield definitely different, almost 40% less than what we do with single family when we look at this from the district average. So we're at about 10 K-5 students for every 100 units for multifamily units, and it's declined a little bit to 9, but again, we've built over 2,000 units. Next few maps help give you a visual of where the housing was built. So here, the average year built. So looking at that county data, where are we seeing the units age? And again, no surprise to the south, right? Not telling you something you already don't know. When we look at our median home values, you heard some in the public comment. This helps illustrate when we look at the assessor valuation of properties. Generally, as we move to the south and southeast, the value of the homes go up, generally speaking. Where we have our building activity is represented by the dots, again, all moving towards 62nd Avenue, where we see the bulk of those dots. Just to give you perspective of building over decades, except for the last column where it's really just 3 years, just to give you a sense of, hey, in 3 years, if we've built 1,000 units, the previous decade we built 4,300 units, are we tracking towards that? Well, right now I'd say we're probably going to be close to that. Again, that's if we continue on some of our 150 to 300 units. If we track more towards the lower side, we're going to be short in being able to hit the number of units in the previous decade. So the orange part of the bar represents what was built at the start of the decade. That maroon color is what was built during that decade. The other element is through conversations with the city, doing the tour of your district to apply a qualitative measure into our statistical analysis. We've determined the areas you see on this map, green being current activity, or we should be seeing some. And then we have purple, which represents the out towards 10 years, and the yellow closer to 5 years. So again, lots of different activities that are happening in the district. All of that map is tied to this tabular data to give you a sense of what's available now. So when I look at those last 4 columns of this table, there's about 1,000 units that are available to be built now. In that 5-year period, another 1,300, almost 1,400 units. And in that 10-year period, almost 2,200 units. If you go back to the build out of what we've experienced between 150 and 300 units, this gives you perspective that even in the green areas, we have at least 3 years of building inventory. That would be a healthy building inventory. When we start to get under 3 years of building inventory, that's where the cities start getting concerned about, will we be able to sustain what maybe the economy is indicating we need for housing? The other question that's not answered in this, and it wasn't part of our study, but it's indirectly part of it, and that's affordability, right? That's a very different question. We don't get to drive that, whether it's RSP or you as a school district. This happens outside of our purview. This is a city-driven element, and they are trying to find ways in which they can have affordable housing. And so that's a different question, and that's something that all of the cities here in North Dakota are stressed with and trying to find some answers. We also looked at the university enrollment, and look at this, man. We've really been on an upward swing back from where we had layoffs a few years ago. Remember when I reported that? And the next year we saw an enrollment decline. So this is really nice to see that we're over 15,000 students in 2024. So some regional projects that we kind of spotlight here, just to indicate there's a lot of really cool things that are helping drive people move to this community, and why some of the housing is being built and why we're seeing some of the changeover. So this is just a small part. I'll tell you, the airport, if they can get United here, boy, that'd make my life so much easier coming up here, particularly if my daughter ends up coming here. So yeah, I'm pushing for the United. But we've also had conversations that in order for that to happen, there's going to need to be some changes to the airport, right? You guys have flown out of there, and those 2 gates is pretty cramped at times. So things with the airport are going to drive some of the economic drivers here. That's what we listed that up there. Obviously with the hospital, those are drivers. We're a hub for this area and surrounding for people to receive those services. So again, just a few of the really cool things happening in your community. Overall, with development, we think it's a positive trend. So getting into the projections, where are things happening? So if you go back to COVID and COVID hit, we've been really trying to calibrate things because things are quite a bit different. And so again, just being transparent of where the accuracy is. Some things have been under projecting what we've saw in years past. And so in this year's projection, we made some adjustments, some significant adjustments with some of the other variables that we feel a little more comfortable with as it relates to some of the live birth data, some of the housing product, and what we're yielding to really drive at moving towards a 99 to 100% accuracy. Some of those things that we're starting to see in your enrollments are showcased on this page. So the top visual is that blue column represents the seniors, and then the diagonal red line represents kindergartners. And you can see that we're starting to plateau out where we can't expect the senior class to be smaller than the incoming kindergarten class. It's kind of plateaued, and we're very similar. And so we're going to have to get our growth differently. And so this starts to get into things with the cohort change, or something that some districts we've classified as destination districts. So when we see that cohort growth stabilizing where there's always black numbers across that row, we would say you're a destination district. We're close, but we have some grades where we continue to see some decline. The bottom table gives you a visual of where we've been for average class size at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. And then with that black line, it divides and shows where things are headed. So you can see that when you look at this, kind of looks a little bit washed out on the screen, but if we follow the red line, it starts to stabilize and have some slight declines at the elementary level. When we look at the middle school, it starts to increase, and as well as the high school starts to increase. If you go back to the tables of the number of students by grade, as they start to move up into the middle school and then into the high school, in order for us to move to the next level, elementary enrollment has to pick up more than what it is. So I'm saying we're basically becoming a mature district, but we have challenges with where that enrollment change is occurring. And will continue to be challenges as we look at that from capacity and as we look at this where our buildings are located and where the development is happening that's driving where we see students. This visual here with the columns, red being elementary, blue being the middle school, green being the high school, purple line being the aggregate of all three of these, helps you see over the next 5 years what's happening at the grade bands of elementary, middle school, and high school. And that's how we get that roughly 200 more students in 5 years than what we currently have. All of the notes on page 45 correlate with what you see in the ensuing pages with the projections broken out by building. So here's the existing boundary. An existing boundary. This is not anything that we've spoke about with the committee. If we move forward with these current boundaries, what would enrollment look like? Lots of information on this page. We have our district functional capacity in the second column. And then as we move to the right for the past enrollments, we show you that enrollment 3 ways. The middle row green font is reside. That's the one I like the most because once I geocode students, I know where they live and I know how that aligns with any of our boundaries. The bottom row for every building, blue font, is attend, and that is related when we get the school student data, where are those students actually attending? I like that row as well when it gets to what's happening with your programs that may be driving why we're seeing some changes between where students reside and where they attend. The greatest number of students that's going to drive this is going to be our MLL students and some of our special education programming students because they are in selective buildings. The top row purple fonts is a subset of reside. That is, they reside and actually attend that building. So when we look at alphabetically, we'll look at Ben Franklin. We have 318 K-5 students. These are in our system. There's other kids in our district that live in Ben Franklin's boundary that go to private or homeschool, parochial. This is our kids that are actually in our brick and mortar. 318 reside there and would be attending there if they didn't go to another building. When you look at that 314, you say, wow, we just had 4 kids that went to one of the other elementary buildings. Very different than that. We have to look at that purple number of 268 of the 318 resided and attended that building. We picked up from 268 to 314 other kids from other buildings in our district. So this gives you that flow of students. This is pretty typical. If I had Williston up here, Bismarck, Fargo, this would be similar. We see movement of kids no matter how any district tries to say, you live in this boundary, you go to this school. It doesn't happen that way. When you move to the right, you see the projections for the reside and the attends. You see shading that represents where buildings are greater than 100% capacity, shaded in orange. When it's under 70%, we shade it in the green. The significance of green becomes an efficiency, where the district may start to say, we need to share art, music, counselors. It's usually driven by dollars. Most districts try to hold everything steady regardless of what the enrollment is in the building. So I'm not trying to suggest you are doing that or you need to do that. I'm just saying those are the things that if a building is underutilized, we want to get more kids there. Much like if the building is overutilized, there may be services that are negatively impacted for what the student experiences day to day in those classrooms. Again, you see this as we pull into the second part of the elementary alphabets. And then our secondary buildings. And then this all ties back to the visual of the red, green, and blue, or red, blue, and green if I go in order of elementary, middle school, and high school. So overall, projections, we think it's a positive, and hopefully I've laid out the framework that you can see this with the demographics, the developments, the live bursts, all of that really cool stuff. Really, our next steps, I'm not going to read all these bullet points. Really, here's what it comes down to. This has been the foundation to how the committee has been looking at the questions that you gave them to try to solve. Right? So think about this as a lever, and what we got from the committee, we really pushed the levers down, right? And we heard some feedback from you, from the community on, hey, that might be a little bit too fast. Okay, if it's too fast, when I segue into my second section, we'll talk about that, right? So we kind of pulled back a little bit. But ultimately, how do you get to the understanding of how far you need to go? It's really two things: the data, and then how far will the community allow the change to be met? You know, what is that speed? If we're initiating this in 26, 27, is that too soon? Do they need to be phased? Those are the elements that we get to talk about here this evening in part two. So I want to stop there, see if there's any questions you might have about enrollments, demographics, and the projections. And again, feel free in your other time, read through this. There's other cool things in the appendix that drill into some other aspects of what's happening. I just try to keep it at a fairly high-end level. But any questions about enrollments, developments, or the projection outlook?
Questions from board members? Mr. Palmasino.
On your potential solutions, you say elementary challenges will be difficult to address with boundary adjustments without additional capacity. Are you talking additions to schools, new schools? What are you referring to?
Yeah, so one of the things that became clear in the conversations with the committee as we're digging into the data, and you'll see that in the next segue section, is what do we do in the South seem to be tied to even conversations we've had here at the board. Do we have additions at Century? Do we build a new building? Do we look at Viking? Is there some sort of addition there? Do we look at some of the other conversations of buildings on the north side? Do we have a tear down rebuilds? Is there another building on the north side? So there was a lot of things that when we look at what's available for capacity in the conversations specifically in the south part of the district, we don't have enough facility space for the students that are there, which is why the solutions always had some, typically Lake Agassiz, coming down south to, I believe, about 17th Avenue to pick up kids. We even showed it coming even further south just so that we can have some adjustments. And that's why when we segue into what you all may need to consider or what the next steps are, I think that's probably part of it, is how we're using space. Specifically, even tonight, you heard some conversation about the social well-being of students. Well, how do we use space is very different here in 2025, and I likely suspect it'll be different as we move forward, not only for that, but for our special education programs. So our ASD programs, they need different spaces. And so when we look at some of these buildings, the community may say, we've had significantly more kids in that building. And I would agree, we clearly did. But how we program those buildings, very different today. It's kind of a long question, but the capacity is a really big component that we've been challenged with here, right? Part of the conversations with the bonds and everything have all related to, we know we need some different and in some cases better space. But we need to start advocating that with the community. And I think that starts with this boundary plan.
Other questions from board members? Mr. Clevin.
Just to follow up for just clarification, the statement about not having enough capacity at elementary school, that was based on a kind of a region in the district boundary, not overall capacity of currently what we have in total, correct? Based on an area where there's capacity challenge, not overall challenge in the district. Elementary school only.
No, I think our challenge, we have to look at our capacity two different ways at the elementary. So with Twining, we have quite a bit of capacity. So when I look at the elementary total, and you'll see with the realignment where we take that out, our capacity gets really tight with the city schools. And so we have capacity, but we can't send the kids up there. Right? So there's limitations where we have the most available capacity. And when you look at this by building, you see more of our facilities where if they are over capacity, so in this orange, look at this, most of the buildings have orange. Right? And so depending how far over the orange, when you start to add them up, we're at a point. And let me give one other clarification of capacity, because it's capacity is just an amazing thing, because if we brought teachers up and they started to talk about how spaces are used, I guarantee you buildings where it looks like there's capacity, they're using the space. There's no doubt in my mind. So don't take where there is space in buildings that they're misusing the space, they're just using it differently. It may not be to its highest function of what you would do in a full building where we start to look at things. Is art on a cart? Is music in a different space? Are the hallways cramped? What's it like when I come to school, leave school? What's the playground like? What's the lunchroom like? There's lots of issues there. Typically what you want with your buildings is to be at when we talk about this functional capacity, you want to be in that 85 to 90%. That gives us flexibility when a grade may have enough students to add a section that we have a classroom. And it also allows us some flexibility where if, let's say, a program needs to expand for a year, we can expand in that building. If we don't, then we get into the situations of, hey, this program's been here at Ben Franklin and now we're going to move it. Well, we never move it to Kelly. It's full, right? But you get the point. It's like we end up trying to find spaces. And so part of the functional capacity is for us to be thinking about space more in an infinite way of how can we allocate our space so that the programs can effectively work within the space and the ability of where the students are. Very different than the way we've managed capacity before, where if we have space, we're like, hey, can we move this program here? And that's how we operate. In fact, that's how almost every district does. So using the data of functional capacity, how that aligns with our enrollments with these programs helps us better align how we can educate these students.
Mr. Bakke?
I would just like to ditto what Rob just said, because we're already there when it comes to functional capacity. We are running into problems and issues with our programs where we are having to move them because we don't have room in the buildings. Right now, I will be honest, and Tracy's in the audience as well, we are at an issue where we do not have space for Head Start. We are having to find space for the programs that we have. We're adding additional programs. When you look at our annual report and you see an increase of 6% in special education, that's not just in special education at the elementary level, that's across the district, I recognize that. But when we talk about setting Cs, each one of our setting C classrooms needs its own classroom and space designed for those students to help the students' special individualized needs. And that is putting a burden on our elementary schools as we see increases in setting C needs for students, as well as our ECSE, early childhood special education, Head Start programming. It just continues to be an ongoing item as it relates to capacity, functional capacity. And what Rob just stated, we're there. We're not gonna get there, we are there. We are having to move programs constantly because we don't have room where they're currently at, and we need additional space.
Are questions from board members? Dr. Lund?
Robert, are you able to factor in potential policy changes at the state level, or heaven forbid I even mention at the federal level? And how can you do that until it's done and you know what it is?
Yeah, that's probably where I leave you with how I started, right? We don't know what the impact of tariffs are going to be for some of things like lumber. Does that mean there's a transition of, hey, we're not getting our lumber from Canada, so we start deforesting areas of the United States to be able to supply lumber? Well, there's some time for that to pick up, right? So we have to look in our crystal ball and make some assumptions that there's going to be some things that are to the advantage of the development community, and then there's going to be some other things that will be a disadvantage, and that it's going to shake out something that's going to respond to what we see for developments. And it's really tricky because how many of the dollars that are being promised right now, how long does it take for any of those industries to build what they're saying they're going to build, right? So again, I'm not trying to get into the politics beyond, hey, once I say I'm going to build something, we can start with a data center. There's lots of data centers that we see through the Midwest that they're going on 5-6 years just trying to get built. And that's before anything with administration changes, tariffs, right? So again, we just try to take what some of the city folks are saying that they're seeing, because they're the first eyes and ears to what people may do with the developments, and try to apply that into our numbers. So we're not being crazy and saying you're going to have 350, 400 units being built. We've kind of ramped that down a little bit, just to be sure that we're not too liberal in our application.
Dr. Lund?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear enough to you. I apologize. I was thinking more specifically about education, like policy changes in North Dakota, school choice, or the DOE being eliminated federally, or things like that. And I'm assuming it's similar to what you were talking about. Until it happens, we probably really won't know what kind of impact we would have at a local level.
For sure. So let's just break two of those down so people can hear this. If the DOE is dissolved at some level, a portion or all, the question is what happens with those dollars, right? So does it come down as a grant? Does it come down where people would start applauding if we would fund all the unfunded mandates? How does that change things, right? So we can look at this optimistically or pessimistically from that front. As far as open enrollment, what I tell all of our clients across North Dakota, if we do what we're saying we're trying to do for kids, we're going to minimize people making those choices to go to other programs. I also am not putting my head in the sand. When you start to apply dollars that may go with opportunity to choose other things, we'll just look to another state where we do a lot of work, and that's Iowa. And they've moved from an open enrollment to something that's transitioned that was based on socioeconomic, so what your household income was, to the Wild West, where that doesn't matter. Well, we've done enough work in Iowa. Do you know what that's changed? It changes if you are sending your kid to private or parochial, what you pay. We've not seen it really change statistically the number of kids that make that choice. So kind of an interesting thing. No one thought that when they pushed that forward. They thought there would be more of a movement of the have-nots saying, hey, now we have the ability because there's money that goes with us to a building. We haven't seen that in Iowa, statistically speaking. So again, we're watching that, because just because it happened that way in Iowa doesn't mean that's the way it'll happen here.
Other questions? Ms. Flynn?
I have a couple questions. So more so on the data. One of my questions was open enrollment, more so like if we have 100 plus open enroll from Manville, Thompson, can we cut that off? You know, I mean, I think that's something for our board to consider as a policy changes. Like, what do we do with that? You know, obviously we can't do that for special ed services, but if someone, you know, I want to be a good partner for the local rural schools, but if it's putting more of a burden on us, then I don't know that that's, you know, something that can continue. Relocatables was my next question. More so within the functional capacity discussions, if relocatables are considered in functional capacity, and if so, should we be operating off of trying to get rid of those, and what is our functional capacity of just buildings?
All right, two questions. I'll start with out of district. So you can see it's declined from where we were 5 years ago. The bulk of them are high school students. So a totally different question. We have space at the high school for those out-of-district students, and I think they're making a choice. Again, this is one of those things that when we talk about if we have open enrollment, here we have opportunities where kids, they want to be in our district, right? I think if we drilled into some of this data, we would find there's a good number of them that are staff kids. So it's a retainment opportunity for some of them. So I know I'm very pro with some of this out of district because not knowing where the future goes, we want to make sure that we have that happening. Now, the other thing to talk about this, you keep hearing me talk about levers. So open enrollment is much like that. If you just let it wide open, we can have some really serious challenges, kind of like a tsunami effect of kids in the system. So when I look at this, you can see that just generally we're under 50 students for elementary and middle school for this current school year. Now, I don't have the exact number up there, but if you just take that 50, you spread that out across our elementary buildings, the next question would be, well, what buildings are they at? Then the final question to that, are they staff members, right? So there's some other layers in here to help you with that. So yes, we need to watch that. You just can't let it just go unchecked. Your next question was... Give me a couple words. What was it about?
Relocatables, functional capacity.
So relocatables and portables. I think in our two buildings that we have them at, they're part of the capacity because we're using it, but we've made known that that's not ideal. They're there, and think how badly it would be if we didn't have those. Now, if I recall, the majority of the students, Matt, you might be able to speak to this. I think the programming that we've done is to minimize how many students would be out there at any given time. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but I think that gets into, they're not ideal, and so we try to use them in a way that is beneficial.
Yes, they're full-time classrooms, though. We use them every day for classrooms, both at Wilder and Viking. And if we didn't have them right now, we wouldn't be able to hold the classrooms we have currently there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where we have to build that before we get rid of those relocatables. So.
Well, and I think part of that discussion, and you know, I'm going and looking at our ask, so to speak, to the committee. I think part of these conversations and hearing the public talking is really good to say, maybe this is not what we should be doing. Like, it's good to check options off the list too, right? But I also think, like, you know, Bill brought up last time the addition to Century potentially. You know, that might not have been a directive of the board, but what I'm looking for is to not treat the symptoms, but rather treat the root causes of some of these issues. And I think we start to get a little bit more of like, well, what's the symptom? You know, if we're planning for 5-10 years down the road, we should be planning for non-functional capacity, in my opinion, without relocatables. And certainly that probably adds, you know, 3 more slides to your 75-slide presentation, and we could go every which way. But I am having a hard time maybe making decisions or understanding these numbers. I love seeing these because it's so cool to see how the numbers play, but we do have some limitations. We have some barriers. We have a very gridded city with a lot of rural cities around it. We have growth to very certain parts of the city. But I also am thinking at this point, are the boundary lines shifting, treating the symptom and putting a Band-Aid on a problem? Or should we be looking at do we have more space in the land next to Viking that we can expand on? What about Schrader and Kelly? What about Lake Agassiz? Are we working with the university to, do something? Can we take over one of their buildings? Do one of the schools become an ML center? At this point, I think we can't talk about your enrollment projections now without talking about boundary lines, right? We're here. Should we have been talking about the school district land 7 years ago? Maybe, on 62nd. And certainly we learn new things all the time, but, I'm hearing these and all these questions are popping up of just, where do we go from here, which is a good segue. But I have a hard time looking at functional capacity now when you look at pictures from the 40s where kids didn't have stuff. There's not technology. They're all sitting in rows. There's 30 kids to a classroom. Certainly things have evolved now where we need to consider that. But what is the definition for us of our functional capacity? Is it with or without relocatables? Is it with or without expansion? I don't know. But there's probably more comments in there than questions. But
Just going to piggyback on that, and then to Mr. Clevin, to Amber's point, and I think, Rob, you touched on this, these two points of looking at the data and then looking at what the community collectively is willing to absorb, accept, how much change, how fast, however you characterize that. I do think the third leg of the stool is the community's appetite to support at the elementary level expansion, new construction. I don't know how to get at that in a timely fashion as we wrestle with boundary lines, but some of these discussions bring that to the surface. In other words, if these lines aren't acceptable, if this solution, in whatever palatable means or however we want to talk about these community conversations, then would you support this plan, that plan, both, and in what timeline? Certainly we have to look at when we could go forward with a referendum, what that would look like. But I do agree that it has illuminated some of these longer term conversations at the elementary level. Mr. Clevin.
Listening to Amber's questions, those are the policy debates we all get to settle. Those are all sound like policy questions that we're going to be challenged with. So this is great data to help us get there, and that's very much appreciated. One more clarification. I think I know the answer, but I want to ask just to make sure we get it clear. On your slide, page 46 perhaps, there's a statement that says in the purple box in the lower right-hand corner, it says 6 to 7 elementary schools with experience challenges, and then it says 87.1 capacity. Does that include Twining?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it does. And I'm going to check that just to come back to make sure with the numbers, but I believe it is because everything should be correlated to this. I want to also segue of how this transitions, but first, is there any other questions about this? And then I can kind of take what you said, Amber, and that pulls into the next.
Sure. I just want to be respectful of Board Member Larson in case he's got a question. So, Mr. Larson?
No questions. Thanks, Dave.
So, again, these are all recommendations for discussion. So I think it's wise if you have a good segue into 5B. Why don't we go ahead?
And this one may take longer. Oh no. I know. Oh no. But no, it's. So let me talk a little bit about Amber's. I fastly moved to this point. So what you're getting at is what I would call the question behind the question. There's a book by John Miller that gets at this particular component. If you go back to when we set out on this journey, if Brandon was here, we have no dollars, right? In order to go out for our next bond referendum, I think it's 28, 29, if I'm not mistaken.
It's more when we would free up some cash because we'd have some capital paid off.
There you go. So how we can structure some of our dollars is an important piece to that. So when we started on that journey, it was, hey, we're not building anything more. Use the existing inventory. Now, the value of that is now it's come back to you all, and you're starting to say, well, when we look at this from a longer term focus, is there maybe a different solution that we should be working toward rather than just moving kids from one building to another building, knowing that we're at this position that Matt said, where our functional capacity, we're already busting. We're already using spaces that we would ideally say we're not needing to use, but we have to use them, right? All these portable spaces. So how does that position us in the conversation is kind of how we moved some of the talking points for this portion of the presentation. And when I say we may go longer, it'll be, now for me, it'll be if you guys have questions. Very different. So here's kind of the process that was mapped out as we get here to March 17th. What I wanted to highlight on this page 4 is these were generally things that we started to hear from you, and as we looked at how could we accommodate what your thoughts were, also laced with what we were hearing from the community inputs and the survey. And so we started to think there's more questions on the south side. And so anything we change on the south is almost, if you take something full and move it to something else full, but we've just moved some kids that maybe we were hearing, hey, we're already at this building, or we're at a building that is, let's say, a nicer building, and now you're going to move us to a building that has portables. That's not fair. Well, I wouldn't disagree from that particular viewpoint. From the district viewpoint, we're having to use this space because this is what we have, and it's happening. So we started to look at the elementary in 2 phases, so kind of a north and south perspective, but knowing that when we decide to make that type of move, that means we're saying that Discovery, Kelly are going to be extremely full. And specifically for Discovery, that may be a 50-student difference. When we look at Lake Agassiz, where it would come south in the revised plan, now that it doesn't come south, there's more kids at Century, right? And so because there's more kids at Century, it can't wrap down and help pick up things that we're going to be in Viking. It also doesn't then fully address some of our conversation of having more of a complete feeder as we look at the elementary schools and what that means, because we were trying to have breaks on Washington, right? So there's some things that we start to have some trade-offs, like, hey, we don't want to make some moves because we're not yet comfortable with what we're going to do in the South with portables and the additional capacity. As we move to the middle school, we're saying we keep that the same, but because of the phased plan, we naturally have splits that I just mentioned, with Viking staying west of Washington. Well, it now would be split. And I'll show you this stuff on the maps too, if as I'm talking it doesn't make as much sense. The high school, what we heard was moving all the way down to 62nd Avenue. That was too much for the community, or maybe even some board members and administration to really swallow. And so we went back to some of the things that we heard starting at the committee, things that we heard from the public of, hey, maybe 32nd Avenue is the starting point of a transition that shows some things. So we're going to look at some numbers on that. Part of the high school too, we know that that's quite a dramatic change when people are changing from one system to the other system. And so what we integrated into this was a grandfathering student option that would take 4 years for the change of moving Central South to 32nd Avenue for it to officially take place for all grades. And I'll explain that again to you. It's the same thing that I showed last time, but I want to make sure you all understand that. And then we heard a lot of conversation about the Air Force Base kids remaining at Central. And so all of this is layered back to what's happening with enrollment, what's happening with our functional capacity. one thing that I do know, if there is no other space that's closer to 62nd Avenue, all of the same challenges that we heard in this go-around are still going to come up, because we're going to have to move kids around in the south. And so when you're on that east side of Washington, north of 62nd Avenue, that's at Discovery, basically this is putting everyone on notice. We can't keep you at Discovery. We can't keep all the stuff that's at Kelly, right? So there's some changes that we're saying will have to happen at some point, even if it isn't in phase one. There's some realities of what that means, whether it's a new building, it's additions, or fill in the blank, whatever you guys are thinking. So that's kind of phase two, where we say, hey, I should have put success of a bond, failure of a bond. No, we want a successful bond. But the point being is, if we don't get dollars, how are we going to be able to do it, right? So those are some of the things that we were thinking about on why there would be two phases to the elementary, moving forward with the middle school, and then the high school making a slight change where it comes to the south, but a student option grandfathering. So again, visually what you see here, Discovery, Kelly, Viking, Lewis and Clark, Phoenix, Ben Franklin, and Century all stayed the same in phase one. Our only change is the Wilder Winship, or the Lake Agassiz Winship area. And we already have a lot of kids that are in that area that are going one way versus the other. So we've had a lot of conversation with the district on where do people think that boundary is and where are kids going to school there, right? Again, some of the application in this is that the ML kids would be going to their neighborhood school. So this is phase one of elementary. Not a lot of change, because there's some questions that the board would need to either redirect back to the committee saying, we're committed to a addition, or we're committed to a new building, and it would happen approximately at X time frame based on Dr. Brenner, Brandon, Matt, Catherine's input, right, on those elements. Nothing changed with the middle school. This is that initial revised committee, so there's been no updates with this boundary. And then with the high school, you can see the slight area that comes down to 32nd Avenue that's now in Central. And then you see what the impact is for students. So initially, when I look at this, I look at Discovery, right? Can we wait for that building to be at 620, 650 students? So if we can't make a decision until 28, 29, can we wait? That's to me the first question you have to ask. Is there other things we can do in that building? And is that the right thing to do for the building, for the staff, for the students, right? You see where that drills. The other component to this is, when you look at these functional capacity numbers, as I told you last time, this isn't an absolute number of 204. And I think in the last projection I said, hey, or presentation, it can go a little bit higher than that. It's how much higher and how long will you be able to do that without there being some sort of negative impact on the student experience, and specifically the academic experience, right? So that's one of the things that stands out here. The other thing that is really interesting with the slight change of the high school boundary, when we get out to 2930, when it's fully implemented, we're right at almost equal enrollment. Now, there is one other thing that's going to happen here, right? Our community high school tends to draw more kids out of the current Central than Red River. So those students would come out of these numbers. And there's roughly, 80 students roughly total. So that gives you some perspective that we have some space. And again, the other thing that we have to talk about, where I'm showing that Central at 1200, they're over their 1183 capacity. So there's some questions there. How does this relate to the programming, right? So again, a number gets us to a conversation, but is it the right number for the way the building is programmed. So there's some conversations that administration has to have there. But overall, the number is like 1,200. We come back to this diversity index so you have the perspective of what this looks like. And the goal would be that everything's within the district average. That's not possible, right? So I stated that probably several times. I'm probably a lot more succinct in it tonight. We're not going to have all of these in white without it being a checkerboard where we just start looking at each individual student and assigning them to a boundary. It's just not possible to have everybody right at that district average. Here with the students that would be impacted by the boundary change, if you made it effective across all of the grade bands for each of the grades. So at the elementary, we're only moving that one area, so we have those students going over into Winship. There's 63 students. Again, this is 2 years out, so we're just using K through third grade, right? It goes up as we get 1 year before the boundary change. Then when you look at the middle school, there are about 49 students that are impacted. Again, that's just the current 6th grade. When we're 1 year out, we'll have 2 grades, so it goes up a little bit. High school, again, if we look at that top table where we're just looking at the current 9th and 10th graders, it's about 41 students. I went back and we look at the existing 8th through 10th, and it's 73 students. Again, just trying to give you a segue of what that would look like the year before. Well, one of the things we heard from you was we don't want to impact the high school students. So could we do something with some grandfathering or student options? In the next slide, I'll show that to you. Here gets at that same visual we showed you last time with the feeders, so that you can get a sense of what that percentage of kids are that would flow through based on the reside as they move from elementary to middle. If we look at the elementary to high school and then the middle school to high school, remember in the revised plan, the elementary to high school was 100%. Right, so when we make a choice to delay what could happen on the south, we have an impact on the feeder. So if you are like, I want a complete feeder, you're not getting it here. The demographics piece to this, again, just to give you perspective of how that relates with what this plan looks like. And then let me talk about the phasing. So when we look at what a phasing would look like if we applied this for 26-27, what would occur is the 10th and 12th graders, that are already in the building, they're going to stay in that building that year. Incoming 9th grade would be applicable to the new boundary. And so I would calibrate this based on the year that we want, if you want this delayed or if you want to start it sooner, but I chose 26-27 because that's when the middle school goes into effect. It just makes sense if we're doing something at the secondary, if we're going to make this change, we're giving people time to know what this looks like. So in 26-27, if you're an existing 10th and 12th grader in that area that's changing to Central, you would still have the option of staying at Red River. Incoming 9th grade, you would go to the new boundary, with the exception if you have a sibling that's physically as a 10th through 12th grader that year at Red River, that freshman would be able to go to Red River. Year 2, you can see how it starts to phase out, that it's only that year's 11th and 12th graders, and the 9th and 10th graders are applicable to the boundary, with the exception that if I have a sibling that's 11th or 12th grader, I can stay at Red River. And then 28-29, you can see then it's only the 12th grade, and then by 29-30, it's fully implemented. So again, this gives time. If we're wanting to give time, rather than saying 26-27, all of you in this area, you go here. So that's how that student option grandfathering would be. The logistics of it would be the students that were in attendance, we would select a date. This would be part of like your policy. And let's say we make it March 17th, since today's March 17th. Whoever's in attendance on March 17th in this area, here's these students that are in this collective of where the student option grandfathering could be. And then that would be what you would use in the future years to know, are you eligible for that grandfathering student option? We've done this in many districts where it's a challenge to do things like at the high school level. Last thing, and then questions, comments that you all have. A lot of this is reiterated. We talked about this at the beginning. I want to repeat it again just so people understand the collective of where your thoughts are, and I think of value to say, hey, where do we need to go? What other direction should we provide? And so what you asked for, I wanted you to know, how was it delivered? So we wanted to lower the impact on elementary students. Clearly did that with 2 phases. With the middle school, we maintained what we had. So we have this balancing of enrollment when Valley opens. High school, you wanted us to lower the student impact. We're able to do that with this grandfathering student option. We're still able to start moving the dial, when you think about this from a dial clockwise, of how something would move further south, east of Washington. Some other things to consider for phase 2, again, are what do we want to see happen? How uncomfortable are we with functional capacity in some of these buildings? That's going to dictate, along with the dollars, how fast can we resolve some of these situations? How much does it revert back to more of what we showed you with a complete plan that came out of the committee and that revised plan? So we need to consider some things that might be additions at Century, building a new elementary building, and then continuing to monitor what's happening with the enrollments as it relates to the new developments on the south side of town. That concludes everything. Probably answered all your questions. You have nothing to ask. Probably so.
We'll see. Questions from board members. Mr. Palmasino.
Can you go back to your middle school map? Okay, my question is if you look at where Century Elementary is, and now we've added kids down from 11th to 17th, that we're taking them over Demers and the railroad tracks to go to Valley. And yet, when I look at the projection tables here, they're currently at South Middle School. South Middle School is going to be at 78 to 79 to 82% in projections on the deal. Why are we moving those kids across that barrier and not letting them stay where they're at? Because then next, when they hit high school, they go to Red River.
Yeah, so this gets into the opportunities of increasing enrollment at a new building, right? So we have a new building, and some of the opportunities the committee looked at was how can we potentially have a different mix of students, different opportunities in this new building that could change what we see happening in that facility. So it's a combination of that. We have a new facility, and with this idea that with our 2 high schools, there's an idea of how we move south. It's easier to move south at the high school level when we're on the east side of the district. And when I say easier, not easier for how it impacts a family, but with where the buildings are located, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge. It's easier on the south side to move areas that are on the north side of its attendance boundary up than it is as we come further south and try to move things that might be on the west side of Washington. So again, not a great answer, but it was how the committee, as we looked at opportunities of balancing students, type of students, and making a good mix in these buildings.
I think we're just kind of picking out a group of people. If we want to balance kids, maybe we put out a notice that we need kids to go to Valley because we've got a brand new school. Who's interested? You might get more kids that way than forcing these kids who, are going to cross an intersection. And we all know for the next 3 years, 42nd Avenue, 42nd is going to be closed once they start the overpass. So there's going to be one option for those parents to get their kids to school, and that's going to be going to Columbia Overpass. That's where I'm thinking, but it doesn't make a lot of sense when you then have a school with less than 80%, full on down at South, and you're putting them into a new school just to address different type of students.
The other opportunity with South is where we have the potential to see more of the new developments. So you can see that whether you come down on the west side or you come down on the east side, there's a desire to move more kids from the south to the north. So whichever kids, there's going to be a perspective if you come to the east side closer to Schrader, you're going to have the same impact, right? Like we're getting closer to where a building is at this particular location, barring what changes happen with construction, which is temporary. You're almost equidistant between those two buildings.
Yeah, but you're not crossing Demers at the railroad tracks. You know, one way you're owning doing that. My other question is did your group ever look into parking at Central High School? Is there going to be issues with parking, bringing more kids from the east side to Central? You know, with the Franklin on First is going to take a lot of the street parking around Central High School away from the students. And, you know, for high school students have to park on the second, third, or fourth level of the parking ramp isn't ideal. You know, so I'm just wondering, have we looked at the parking issue at Central, you know, before we bring kids down there, so we're not having to race down there and solve a problem after we've created it?
So I don't have all the answers, but what I'm going to bounce back is, where do kids park now? Right, they're parking there. So the questions that we need to ask is the parking a challenge? Is it something we want to resolve? How do we resolve that at Central, right? So that's a very different question, but using what we know where those kids are, is there adequate parking if they go down there? That's one question, but then is it the parking we ideally want? We can't change that. The only way to change that is if we move the school to another location. That's not happening anytime soon, right? So how do we balance that, looking at all of the different levers that we have available? So parking's one of them. I'm not going to say it's not important, but we can't change what that situation is from where they park. And I haven't heard that there's not adequate spaces. It's maybe not desirable space.
Other questions from board members? Dr. Lund?
I have zero answers for you tonight, so just to preface it. I think everybody on all sides of these issues want to do what's best for kids. There's a little of not in my backyard, and that's expected, and I don't blame them. I've done that myself on certain things. But I look at where is our urgency, and what needs to be decided yesterday, what needs to be decided today, what can wait till next week. And it sounds to me like the issue is elementary and capacity in the elementary things. And I'll remind board members, half of you weren't born, the rest of you are probably in your teenage years, but back in 1997, this city and this school district did some remarkable things after a massive flood. I mean, we had whole schools in churches, we had all sorts of things. So we may have to look at some temporary kinds of things if the urgency, what I'm hearing from Mr. Bakke, is true, because we're not going to have a new school built or an addition built, or probably done talking about boundary line changes in time for some of this. So I think some of this is going to have to be talking a little out of the box. I think we need to prioritize things, and I like what you're talking about with phase 1 and phase 2. My question to you and probably to our administrators is, would it be reasonable to try and get the demographic task force committee together with the board to talk about some of these issues? Because I don't know how many hours they've spent on it, but I suspect it's a lot more hours than most of us have. And why wouldn't we use some of their knowledge and stuff? And I just don't know if that's something that would be worth people's time or not. But I think we've got a group that's done, I'll say it, a hell of a lot of work on this, a lot of time, a lot of effort. And I would like to hear some of the conversation that goes on, not only among us, the 9 of us, but the top administrators, but also that committee. I just don't know if it's worth it, but you guys are probably in a better position than I am to help me decide that.
I think based on the conversation that happened on February 24th at the board table, I think the committee, the task force felt like, I don't want to say their authority, but their recommendations were a bit usurped at the board table, and that's not to anybody's fault. Everybody has an opinion based on data, based on emotion, based on a number of things. To Dr. Lund's point, not in my backyard. So they have, they have done the legwork to make the recommendations. Not everybody in the community is happy with those recommendations. But I think for the board to hear from the people who really dug in and did the work, we could call that a work session where conversation can be free-flowing between board members and task force members. I think that would be helpful. I think that would actually be more helpful than having having a public forum in May, for example, where maybe 200 community members would come. Maybe that would still be part of the plan. Time will tell. But I think that would be a good next step for everybody's voices to be heard, from board members to demographic task force members. I highly respect the people who have done the work. I think their location and proximity and serving on the board, serving on the committee was questioned. How were they selected? All the people were selected based on being good, ethical people who are going to use data to make decisions. So I think it would honor their work to bring them to the table and have a conversation.
Dr. Lund and then Mr. Clevin.
The only other thing I would say is I think administration needs to be honest with us about how urgent is the elementary area. And I think, if we're talking that we need to have some things in place by the fall of '25, then we need to start looking at, well, do we have some empty building somewhere or something like that? So I think we need to know how urgent some of these things are, because then we can be part of the solution too. Sorry, Jay.
And Mr. Clevin.
No need to apologize to Dr. Lund ever. Just to follow up what Dr. Brenner said, it not only honors the committee, I think it's essential that they see this thing through with us. So bringing this back to get with the committee is an excellent idea. Thank you.
Other questions? Dr. Hodak and then Mr. Manley.
I continue to concur pretty much with everything that the board members are saying here tonight, and I appreciate all of that as well, and even with your comments, Dr. Brenner. However, I am concerned, and I think that just coming up with the solution of meeting with those people that served on that task force, as well as I think we still need to hear from the internal. We need to hear from building principals. I'm concerned that in the last couple of weeks, I've heard from internal now school administrators, and they have shared with me that, well, is it this plan? Is it this plan? Is it this plan? Where did this third plan, are we on our third plan now, come from, and do the administrators agree with what the task force has shown? So if they didn't serve on that committee, I think it's vital that we do hear from them, because they're in the trenches. They know their schools. We listen to all of those reports and everything else. Amber asks about the challenges that they face and such. And so I keep kind of pulling back, because I think, one, the data here is outstanding. We have really good numbers to look at and everything else. But there is something beyond in a school. There is something beyond in a district. And that's not just the numbers. We are looking at, I was coming tonight to suggest that, okay, let's get a bus for one thing, And let's us get on that bus and do those lines, those boundary lines. And let's have, when we go to Discovery, let's have Allie Parkinson say, okay, this is where I'm at, and you can see, and she's actually living it as a principal. And yes, it might take us more time, but then we are hearing from the people that are in the trenches. And I'm thinking that that's going to help me understand, even when somebody says 2 minutes more in driving from the south end to Central, all right? To some of us, that doesn't make any difference, but to some parents and some students and such, I think that we keep hitting on issue after issue after issue. I think we're all being very conscientious of the fact that we want to look forward to meeting those needs that we're going to have. I am concerned about when I listen to internal administrators talking about how tight their space is and how tight it is due to the programs that they have and that they are offering, and will they be able to do that? And from Head Start all the way up, I think we're on that very good edge of saying, okay, this is what we can do together collectively. But I just think that we need to continue to look back if we don't do a public forum, but I want to hear now from the internal administrators, and I want them to walk the walk with us so that they can say, this is what it is. I do believe that in conversations that we have a lot of other issues that I personally am contemplating, how do I deal with these issues that have come up, because I am only one. And yet, I know that if a district needs to move forward, we have to address all issues. We can't just put it under. And I know that that seems, huge in our, how can we ever do that? But we need to get at the root of the problems, and we need to get at the purpose of what we're doing and why we're doing it. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Mr. Manley?
It's been touched on, but I want to be just a bit more direct that a lot of hard work went into this, and I want to thank Rob Schwartz, Clark, and the whole entire demographic task force. Appreciate all the hard work.
Entire study for 5 years trying to figure out that intersection, and that is a concern for me, not only parking, but what are we going to do in terms of overloading that area? And so do we need to get MPO involved? Do we need to talk about, do we have data that says what 60 more cars would do to this intersection? I just threw a number out, but I think to Sherry's point, getting the building admin involved, and, one perspective, for example, we haven't heard of is when we see those numbers at Wilder, I think they're the only building that has one space for a gym and a lunchroom. So they have to completely flip their gym and lunchroom and work around their master schedule. I think we need to be very dialed down at, okay, so some of the buildings, and hear from that building admin, here's how they navigate that functional capacity. Here's what an additional 40 students would do. Thompson just experienced it a couple years ago. There were kids eating at 10:40 a.m. and kids eating at 1:20 p.m. So I just think those extra pieces of data would be helpful for all of us. And, I certainly don't want to make this a 3-year thing, but maybe we should have been talking about this 3 years ago. Certainly we had different issues at that time, but the other piece is I think understanding and really dialing down to who are the students that we serve and the socioeconomic piece. I think we kind of breezed over that a little bit last time. Dr. Brenner posed the question. We didn't really, take straw poll vote on it, but I think it's important. But I think we need to understand what socioeconomic status means and how that impacts our schools in a very privileged way, and also in a way that may be lacking of access and resources. And so busing is a huge component of access. And I don't think that we can make decisions and then go to our busing people and say, here's the decision we made, can you retrofit a plan? I think that that is another piece of data that our new busing system is probably familiar and able and willing to help us navigate. Because if we make a plan and then, okay, yeah, kids from Red River are 4 blocks from it and have to go to Central, but those kids are 17 blocks closer to Central than the kids down south, I mean, we, even at a high school level, we need to have busing. And so I just think that we can't retrofit a plan to then say, okay, well, we'll just make it work. Like, we have to honor that and do what's in the best interest of those kids. So, like, do I think we're going to please everybody? No. But I also think that we need to tell the story to the public a little more about the why behind the decisions, because the committee does the work, and I appreciate the work that they're doing. I'm glad that Clark came and gave us a little bit of insight into their thoughts, but absent of them kind of doing it behind closed doors in a positive way, I mean, right? It's not public, right? There's no minutes there. People start to wonder and ask questions. And so I want to honor and give them the ability to speak to the why, but we also have to tell that story to the public. I mean, I think we can do a better job there.
Other questions from board members? Dr. Hodak, your mic is on. Does that indicate any?
Sorry.
Yes, Dr. Lund.
I'm just wondering if board members have, I'll just say their pet projects, but if they have particular interests of things, is that something that we should try and get to Dr. Brenner or something so that at a subsequent meeting it can be discussed, like busing or things like that. I hate for us to keep going and then the next meeting there's another 3 or 4 things that people think are important. I mean, I'm glad Sherry felt that it was important to get some more administrative input. But should we, if we have other concerns like that, should we address it to somebody? Or do we just wait for the next meeting and then bring it up and nobody's prepared for it?
It's a good question. In one sense, and I know we're not nearly at 7B, board requests for future consideration, but I have been taking notes about some of the other parties to involve in the conversation. And so while not an exhaustive list, building level administrators, safe kids, some type of transportation survey or study, Valley Bus, certainly if there are others. Now, to your point, Dr. Lund, now would be the time rather than at the next meeting, what about this thread of the conversation? What about that thread of the conversation? We're all here to serve on the board until June of 2026, and hopefully we can get somewhere and make a decision long before that. But you're right, it can start to feel like here's another request, here's another request. So just to open the air before we close this portion, board members, other threads of that conversation as we move this forward that were not on my less than exhaustive list? Ms. Flynn?
I'm happy to not add any more to the list, but in all fairness, all those people that I said this time, I said last time. So, I think I'm just one person on the board, but when we're saying there's people coming to us and there's people with concerns and there's people saying it's us trying to bridge the gap between the task force and us and what's going on as a positive bridge, not, and I know it comes off as a criticism, but it's very much of like, if I have to make informed decisions, I as a board member do not know the why and I need more. And so, at this time, I don't have any more, but I wanted to make a point to Dr. Lund's point, like, I don't want to continue to ask or add either.
Thank you. Others? Mr. Clevin?
I'll send mine out for more thoughtful phrasing.
I'll add.
Dr. Hodak?
Echo again what Amber said, because where mine are coming from, it's the same issues. It's just that when I started with the concerns about the inequities and the opportunities that were not the same within schools and such and everything else, I was bombarded with what are the differences and such. And so when I look and I hear those things, I'm thinking, does this really have to deal with the boundaries? Will the boundaries actually, if they change, solve some of these issues and everything else? And that's why I just think that it's time that we do hear from the people that are in the trenches. And if we give them that opportunity and they don't tell us or they don't step up to what they've said, then we've tried to give them that. And I don't want to prolong this either. I think that tough decisions are hard to make, but I still think that we need to address some of these issues.
Others? Mr. Clevin and then Dr. Lund?
Just to, again, I ask a lot of questions to clarify and hopefully just address them as they come up. On the topic of systemic differences in program offerings at the high school, and this is a question for Dr. Brenner, does a systemic difference exist?
One example, Mr. Strandell and I had a conversation last summer, was over whether or not an AP course could be offered at Central High School because not enough students enrolled, maybe only one student enrolled. But the inequity would be access to the course. And that student could take the course via Google Classroom, Google Hangout, or the student could transport themselves to Red River to take the class. That would be inequity. And let me just share a couple of other data sets that Athletic Director Tony Bina shared to our broader administrative group at a meeting maybe 6 weeks ago. 3 years ago when Central High School won the boys state hockey tournament, I know they just won it here a couple of weeks ago, but 3 years ago when they won it, Mr. Bina indicated that only 4 students on that team, 4 players on that team resided in the central attendance area. The rest were from the south. I also had a conversation with Max Weiser, tennis coach, boys tennis coach at Central High School, who has recently resigned in the fall of 2023 when they won the state championship. 0 students lived in the central attendance area. All came from the south. So those are things that the task force looked at as well and are trying to balance. I'm not sure if I answered totally your question, Mr. Clevin.
No, but we're getting there. But the point I'm trying to make is an AP class is offered at Central. The same AP class is offered at Red River.
Correct.
But from time to, and there's other examples, but from time to time, they can't be hosted in the central school building because there's not enough participants.
Correct.
And participation in such things, athletics, AP, there's numerous examples I would propose are largely proportional and related to all the diversity index that Mr. Schwartz has presented to us. And I've asked this question of several people whose lives that are involved with statistical analysis of data. And they've all said yes. Participation in those activities is highly related to socioeconomic status of a family. And I'm only bringing this up to justify to a degree, maybe to a large degree, depending on how we each observe it, why those diversity index conditions were important and remain important in this discussion. Because one set of data does lead to positive outcomes in participation.
And I wouldn't respond to that because I wasn't part of the demographic task force, but I would defer to, if Mr. Bakke, if you were part of the conversation, or certainly Mr. Schwartz.
I think there's going to be a lot of questions that are answered at some future meeting. That's the first statement. I think what has to be clear is, to what Amber was saying, what are the problems that we feel at this time need to be addressed, right? This has been a journey, and everybody's learned something along the way. So what I'm going to challenge our team to give to Dr. Brenner are some leading questions for you as board members to answer, and they're going to be specific to the grade bands, high school, middle school, and elementary. Because here's the natural tendency, if you look at what was presented to you from the committee as they took the parameters that you gave them, right? You, the board, gave them. And they came back with something. And so many of them feel that it's not been honored. Why has it not been honored? It's the natural tendency that when we get to making the decision, and you as the decision makers, you're hearing more and more, and there's always another reason to not do something. And so what have you started to see? Here was the dial, we turned it, here's how we were solving it, and then as each 2 weeks goes back, we keep moving it back, and then you look up at the map and you're like, we're not changing anything. So, hey, this middle school, we can't come down by Century. Okay, well, why would we be coming down by Century rather than coming down by Schrader Middle School? Well, look at the map. Where's South Middle School? The more that we take from Schrader, we got to find something else to give to them, right? So where do you take them? At some point, you're right next to South, right? So there's not one variable is going to solve this complexity. What you all, and where I'm going to try to have some leading questions that will help us drive into knowing is, like at the high school, is parking an issue? I can't speak to the number of spaces other than I can tell you when I stay at that hotel, I never have an issue finding a space. But I'm also maybe not there at the time when people are parking, right? Or having different issues that are happening down there. I have more problems slipping on ice than I do anything else. But I want to give you specific questions so you can give some answers that when we come back, that it's not, as you all have said, hey, here's this issue or here's this item. We're not going to have everything in the bucket, right? And there's going to be some of these things that are more important than others. But I want us to come back to what are we trying to solve at the high school? What are we trying to solve at the middle school? And what are we trying to solve at the elementary? And I think all of the information is there in concert with the data that we have been putting together, what you could hear from the committee and for sure from your admin team. And there's a lot of input that I can give you that even when you're talking to administrators, I would be surprised if any one of your administrators said, hey, we want this program gone, or hey, there's these kids that live over here, move them out of my building. I guarantee you're not going to hear that, right? So they're going to do the same thing that you as board members are going to do. They're going to try to preserve what they have because that's what they know, and those kids are there and they love on those kids, right? The things we're talking about are how do we make things better for the student experience, knowing that it's going to change, it's going to be different, and how comfortable are you as a board and how receptive is the community to what that change is? That's all I got to say. Hopefully that'll help drive you to a good conversation.
Anything else, Ms. Flynn?
I just want to comment on maybe like one piece of that is maybe missing. I am one person on this board, but I hope that others would share the same sentiment that if we gave a directive and this is what we asked, because our high-level conversations at the time were coming up with what these priorities are, and the committee then tasked with the work through their conversation is thinking, I don't know that what we can put together on paper is meeting the board's narratives. I also want to give permission to the district and for that committee to come back to us and say, we think that your scope is too narrow. We feel like we can't answer this question. We feel like we can't accomplish this, but here's what we can do. I think sometimes there seems to be the board has issued a directive and that's X cross the line, that's it. And I think if we have conversation about that as a board, like if we're giving a committee a task, And we're saying we've entrusted the people and now they think we've usurped well, part of that is, what is the latitude, and do we have the relationship and trust where we are saying to them, we trust you enough to do the work, but also to tell us if our scope is too narrow, or if we need to revisit something, or if we need to add something. I don't know that that's occurred. I don't know what the internal stopgap conversations are, but I'm saying it here and now. I would much rather appreciate not dedicating 3 meetings and wasting Clark's time and other people's time for them to try to fit a square peg in a round hole. Instead, how do we make the round hole square? And for them to come back and say, this is what we're suggesting.
Other comments, questions? Okay, reminder, this was another recommendation for discussion. Before we move on, though, any final thoughts from you, Rob, before we...
No, you heard my most and best final thought just about a minute ago. So, again, more work to be done. We appreciate the time, and any of the responses that I give hopefully are seen in a positive light of, hey, we're trying to get to this solution, and I think we're close. We just got to do a few things to help hammer it through. So we're there to help you get there.
Thank you. 6A, consent agenda. I would seek a motion to approve the consent agenda in tonight's board packet. Been moved by Mr. Clevin, a second by Mr. Palmasino. We'll take a roll call vote.
Hodak? Yes. Larson?
Yes.
Manley?
Yes.
Clevin?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Palmasino?
Yes.
Lund?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
9 yes, 0 no, 0 absent.
Motion passes. 6B, Head Start, second year of the 5-year grant approval. Tracy Johnson and Matt Bakke.
All right, I will have the opportunity to, in another board meeting, just like last board meeting, introduce Ms. Tracy Johnson, Director of Head Start. She's going to discuss with you today the second year of the 5-year baseline grant funding application and just the continuation of the grant and answer any questions you may have. And again, I just want to reiterate the administrative recommendation is to approve the 25-26 baseline second year of the 5-year grant application budget and supporting documents in the amount of $3,133,277. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
It keeps going on. It's on. Oh, yeah, where's Brandon to help me with that, right? Thanks for having me. So I am here seeking approval for the second year of our 5-year grant. Not much has changed since last year. Our program goals have remained the same, and we have the 5 years to follow through and work on those. I will talk about the gains that we have made with those. One change that we are making, it's right here. I'll move to my PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. The Head Start performance standards were updated last November. So a couple changes were made to the federal performance standards, and those are the changes we're making to our enrollment, recruitment, selection, enrollment and eligibility, recruitment, selection, enrollment, and attendance policy. There are many places in the country where housing costs are considerably high, and so within the performance standards, they are saying that we can figure in families' cost of living if it exceeds 30% of their income. In Grand Forks, we've not had to use that at this point, but it's an option within the performance standards to do it. And then also, they are giving extra points to Head Start employees. Again, they have to income qualify for the program. As you know, we're a federally funded program for families that fall within those poverty guidelines. However, just
with retention of staff, it is kind of a perk to give them some extra points. So we have made some nice progress with our goals. All of our staff have completed a class training. The class tool is something that our teachers use to strengthen the relationships in the classroom with the students and the teaching staff. We have staff and assistant teachers on coaching plans. We have monthly TLCs, book studies, professional development that we're going through. We are following the district's MTSS intervention framework with great success in Tier 2 and Tier 3. One of the things that we really want to focus on is getting our families a medical home. And at this point, 95% of our families do have a medical home. So that's huge in Year 2 of the 5-year grant. We provide on-site examinations. We have dental partners that come in and provide some dental examinations to our students. And then we're able to have families bring students into their offices as well. Just to kind of brag, we are one of the only programs in North Dakota that has these strong partnerships with dentists to provide those. We have a great partnership again with Safe Kids and with the school district with the homeless liaison. Again, we're talking about some collaboration time and some professional development that we're using on those early outs. We have been accepted into the Head Start Wellness Institute, which again is a big deal. There were hundreds of applicants, Head Start applicants that applied for it, and we were able to get it. The Wellness Institute, again, is focusing on the updated performance standard about staff wellness and, again, staff retention. We have implemented some behavior plans with children with that MTSS framework, and we've had staff report that they are feeling supported and safer at work with aggressive behavior. As of December, we did have 15 less staff illness days compared to previous years. And we are getting just great family involvement with our family engagement activities. So those are some things that we've done within the last first year that has been working well towards those program goals. We did complete self-assessments with every component throughout this first half of the year. And so the things that we want to work on in the next years of this grant, again, classroom space, recruitment of qualified staff, and I'm happy to say that as of right now, we will be fully staffed. Next year, we have been down a classroom because we haven't been able to find a teacher. So excited to say that we'll be fully staffed next year. We are continuing to work with Encore and figure out some after-school childcare. Communication with families, we're always trying to find better ways to have that open communication with families. We have a lot of ML students in our program, and one of the things that staff feel that they need is some more training on how to best work with ML students and help them reach their school readiness goals, and with the parents as well. We'd like to replace the playground fence at our main site, and families would like some more education regarding nutrition. So those are the things that we've talked about through the self-assessment that we want to continue to work on. Centers and facilities, just want to talk about that. So we have the main site, which is connected to Lake Agassiz. We do have the intergenerational programming at Valley Senior Living and a classroom at Ben Franklin. And as Mr. Bakke said, we are continuing to work on space for 3 other classrooms for next year. And that is all I have, unless you have some questions.
Questions from board members? Mr. Clevin?
The $784,000 I thought I saw in there,
Yep.
that's a program expense that we have to spend, or is that contingent on award of the grant?
Sure. So because we're a federal grant, we have to have 20% of a non-federal share, or we call it in-kind, that we get back from the community and our families.
Other questions?
Mind you, my question has nothing to do with the merits of the grant. I'm just curious.
Yeah. Great.
And I'm proud to say that last year we were almost $300,000 over the in-kind amount that were required of.
Other questions? Mr. Palmasino?
Yeah. On your 3 classrooms you're looking for, does it have to be in a school? Could it be in a church in town? Do you pay rent to the school, or do you get school free?
I do not pay rent to the school because we can't be charged rent from our grantee. But yes, there's about a $22,000 cost to have a classroom within the elementary school. And then our main site classrooms cost us about $120,000 as well.
Other questions? Ms. Flynn?
Can I just
Sorry,
also
Mr. Bakke.
respond to Board Member Palmasino's question? So we are currently continuing to look at all options. I will say one of the reasonings why we are at this predicament is because of the fact of the influx of students at Century Elementary School. We had to take 2 classrooms offline for Head Start at least to provide for additional classrooms at Century Elementary School. Additionally, Lewis and Clark is another one that we're currently looking at. Right now we have a classroom at Head Start, or at a Head Start classroom at Lewis and Clark, and depending on enrollment numbers that come in at Lewis and Clark may or may not allow us to have a classroom there. So we're looking at all contingency options right now. And so when I talk about the functional capacity of buildings, or you hear me talk about that, right now it's very real with Head Start because we don't have classrooms designated for next school year.
Ms. Flynn?
I'm just curious, is Head Start under the Department of Education?
No, we're under the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay.
Other questions? On the phone, Mr. Larson?
No questions from me.
All right. As you can see, this did receive unanimous approval from the Grand Forks Policy Council. It is now before us for our approval. The administrative recommendation is to approve the 2025-2026 baseline second year of the 5-year grant application, budget, and supporting documents in the amount of $3,133,277. Is there a motion? Yeah, it's been moved by Mr. Clevin.
Move to accept that recommendation.
And a second by Dr. Hodak. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Palmasino?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Lund?
Yes.
Flynn? Yes. Larson?
Yes.
Manley?
Yes.
Clevin?
Yes.
Hodak?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
9 yes, 0 no, 0 absent.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yes.
I have a child care issue, so I need to leave. So I'm sorry I have to sneak out, but
No worries.
I'm Stan's a husband, so.
Thank you. We'll move on to 6C, Finance Committee report with considerations. We'll move first to Finance Committee Chair, Mr. Palmasino, and then perhaps Jonathan Elwine will hear from you as well. But do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I could just take the first part of it, was mainly the safety and security enhancement at Schrader Middle School. And we had heard the information. We do have people here if you have any questions. The maximum price was, guaranteed maximum price was $1,014,817, and that was to upgrade their entrance, and the entrance is moving. It is not going to be off of 32nd Avenue South. It'll be around the corner on the northeast corner of the building. So I think if you have any questions on the cost or anything, Jonathan can help with that.
All right, before we do that, any comments from other Finance Committee members about this point? Dr. Lund?
Jonathan and his team and the construction team do such a wonderful job at the meetings. It makes perfect sense. I just commend them for their professionalism.
Any other comments? Jonathan, did you want to weigh in on any points?
No, I just want to point out that we continue to come in under budget. We just got the bid book in for Kelly as well, and those look favorable. So we look forward to presenting those to the next Finance Committee.
Great. So as you can see, the Finance Committee and administrative recommendation is to approve the GMP of $1,014,817 and a total project budget of $1,224,928 for safety and security improvements at Schrader Middle School. Seek that motion. It's been moved by Mr. Palmasino. Is there a second? Second. A second by Dr. Lund. Any further discussion? Mr. Larson, before we move right past.
Nothing from me.
We'll take a roll call vote.
Larson,
Yes.
Palmasino,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Flynn is absent, Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. C2, consideration of Career Impact Academy remaining soft costs approval from the building fund. We'll see. We're going to right to Mr. Elwine.
Thank you, President Berger. I just kind of want to walk you through the discussions we had in Finance Committee. Really, the ask is to allow us to spend these monies as listed on the memorandum from the building fund, and I just want to remind everybody that these aren't increased costs, and this is really just because we changed on where we funded the CIA from. Before we had it in a separate accounting bucket, we moved the entire project into the building fund. So now, anytime we spend money outside of the GMP, we have to come to you as the board for permission. Just kind of outline this. We've got furniture, technology and security, which was a piece we pulled out of the GMP simply to save some money as well as match our existing systems. CTE equipment, which is everything that's going to be the larger equipment in, say, the aviation space, in the autos and building trades labs, anything that's program specific. And there is an element of a payback on that from some federal programs. I don't have the numbers in front of me. That's more on Mr. Ripley's side, but there is an element of refund on that. Custodial equipment is $100,000. That may seem like a lot, but I will say about $70,000 of that is tied up in the actual equipment. We've got floor scrubbers, we've got carpet machines, vacuums. Those kinds of things are expensive. So just to reiterate, this isn't an increase. This is just us asking for these specific numbers so we can move quickly, because substantial completion is at the end of April. That's very exciting because it's one of our big projects is starting to wrap up. So we want to be able to make sure that we can move in a way that allows us to be ready and open in the fall for students. So the administrative recommendation is to approve $1,905,000 for remaining soft costs associated with the Career Impact Academy. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Elwine? Yes, Mr. Clevin.
And these are capped amounts, so if the bids are lower, right, there's a possibility that these numbers will be less but not higher.
Correct. Yeah, for example, furniture I don't expect to be $650 or $750. We got bids in, we're working on finalization, but I expect it to be quite a bit lower than that.
And then on the technology and security, is it best to come out of the building fund, or could it be the same money we're doing the security and safety upgrades?
That's a possibility. We hadn't made that determination, but at this point, the ask is just to take it out of the building fund, and that was the ask we brought to the Finance Committee, so I don't feel comfortable amending it at this time.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Elwine? Mr. Larson, do you have anything?
Nothing from me, thanks.
As Mr. Allwine said, the administrator recommendation is to approve this, but also it came out of Finance Committee with a recommendation to approve up to $1,905,000 for the remaining soft costs associated with the Career Impact Academy. Do I have
I'd move to accept the recommendation.
It's been moved by Mr. Clevin and a second by Mr. Anderson. Any further discussion? Take a roll call vote.
Clevin,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Flynn is absent, Larson,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. I think you're done for now, Mr. Elwine, but there may be one more later. We'll move on to 6D, policy review. Dr. Lund, would you like to kick this off?
Thank you. Just as a reminder, the policies are always reviewed by the cadre of attorneys at North Dakota School Board Association, by the executive cabinet of our administration, and by the policy review committee. And we lost a third of our policy review to daycare, so we're down to the two of us here. So, the first one is the policy DKEA that we completed the first reading in November. But there were some questions about some things, so it was brought back, and the executive cabinet looked at it and realized that this really is an administrative function and not a board function. So they recommended that the first reading be rescinded and that this become an administrative duty and not a board duty, and the committee was in agreement with that. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask to clarify these 5 bold headers in the memo. Would it be your preference, Dr. Lund, to take this rescind as its own motion and then completing the second reading of those 2 as one? Is that the intent?
That was my intent. I think we can't just do the whole page at once because it's too different.
Yeah. So for purposes of this discussion, any clarifying questions from board members related to rescinding policy DKEA?
I would move we rescind.
It's been moved by Dr. Lund. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Clevin. Any further discussion? Mr. Larson, I just in trying to keep you in the loop, do you, as you look at these bold headers, do you have any clarifying questions about any one of these 5? Would you like me to call on you each time? I certainly can.
No questions from me on any of the 5. Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? We'll take a roll call vote.
Manley,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Flynn is absent, Anderson,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. This next section, completing the second reading and adoption of these following two policies as amended, FF and ABDB. Dr. Lund?
Yeah, these 2 policies have been amended slightly from the first reading, so that's why I think they should be separated. FF, the student conduct and discipline, the only change is on number 3, where it said be identical in content for all school districts. We added except alternative high school programs as allowed by state law. And I would move that we, well, I'll do the second one too. The second one is policy ABDB, which is the generative artificial intelligence in education. The only change from the approval of the first reading is on the second page where, and I think Dr. Hodak was the one that was questioning this, was it did say the district also encourages staff to explore generative AI to discover lesson plans, ideas, create templates or assessments, and to generate ideas for the personalization in student learning. It was felt that is just too nebulous, so we elected to eliminate that and just says the staff shall use generative AI tools in accordance with applicable laws, regulations, and board policies. So I would move that we approve the second reading of both of these policies as amended.
So there's a motion on the floor to approve these two with the amendments, that being FF and ABDB. Is there a second?
I'll second.
A second by Dr. Hodak. Any discussion? Take a roll call vote.
Anderson,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Flynn is absent, Manley,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
HS, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. Your third heading, to complete one reading of BA-BR1 and AAC-BR2. Dr. Lund?
Thank you. The first one, BR1, the Board Ethics Regulation, really this was changed by the North Dakota School Board Association, adding clarifying languages, and then several non-really substantive changes. And we'd initially adopted this policy in 2020, and the Policy Review Committee agreed with the changes that were outlined for that. The second one was the Title IX sexual harassment grievance procedure. And our legal counsel advised increasing the number of days on page 6. It used to say that must be completed within 20 school days. That our council recommended 30 business days, and then on the next one, under the formal resolution procedure, our council recommended increasing it from 40 business days to 60 business days, which, because she just said that that's not enough time frame to work through some of those. So policy committee agreed with those recommendations, and I would move that we approve both of those BRs as changed.
So again, there's a motion on the floor to complete one reading of BA-BR1 and AAC-BR2 as amended. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Anderson. Any discussion?
Just to comment on the ethics thing, I know this group all knows that's the bare minimum standard of conduct, and by just our norms of our meetings, we know we're going to be better than that. So.
Any other discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Flynn is absent, Clevin,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
HS, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. Section 4, rescinding the following two policies, Policy 4105 and HDB. Dr. Lund.
Thank you. Policy 4105 is really administrative work and not board work at all, and so we were in agreement with rescinding that. And the policy HDB, the revenues from school-owned properties, is redundant as it's in other policies and unnecessary, so I would move that we rescind both of those policies.
There's a motion to rescind those two policies outlined, 4105 and HDB. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Manley. Any discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Anderson,
Yes.
Flynn is absent, Hodak,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Lund,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
HS, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. Fifth and final section of this memo to complete the first reading of the following policies as amended: ABAD, DFAA, DKA, FGDB, KACA, KACB, KADA. Dr. Lund?
Sounds like a song. So I think we probably could approve these all at one time, although I'll talk a little differently about them. The first four, virtual school, teacher evaluation, reduction in force, and student handbooks, all had substantive edits by the North Dakota School Board Association attorneys due to changes in state law. The policy, the patron complaints and the complaints about personnel also had some substantive edits and also non-substantive edits for clarity from the North Dakota School Board Association. And then the last one, weapon prohibition, the School Board Association added a footnote reference to relevant state law for more information and corrected a legal reference that was under the definition of school property. So I would recommend that we approve all of these for their first reading, and then they'll come back for their second reading next meeting.
So I heard a recommendation, but not a motion. So
Well, it was a motion. I said recommendation, but I meant motion.
All right, so
Thank
there's
you.
a motion on the floor to complete the first reading of those 7 policies, and a second by Dr. Hodek. Any discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Palmesino?
Yes.
Manley? Lund?
Yes.
Larson?
Yes.
Clevin?
Yes.
Hodak?
Yes.
Flynn? Absent. Anderson?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
8 yes,
Yes.
0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes.
I want to thank the board for allowing the Policy Review Committee to do this work. We can take an hour and a half of work and narrow it down into a smaller time frame. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're on to 6E, consideration of petition and recognition of GFEA as representative organization for negotiating unit. Dr. Brenner?
Thank you, President Berger. I'm just going to, for this first one, I'm going to go through the entire memo, but when we get to the principals and directors, I'm just going to highlight the date change, just to save us some time. So on February 10th, 2025, the board acted to accept a petition for recognition of appropriate negotiating unit as submitted by the Grand Forks Education Association, otherwise known as GFEA. On February 27th, 2025, in accordance with North Dakota Century Code, the Grand Forks Education Association filed the attached petition asserting that the organization represented a majority of the certified staff in its negotiating unit with the board's secretary. The petition reports there are 620 signatures, thanks to President Brady Olson and his leadership team for collecting those, which is 73.4% of the certified staff. In accordance with another North Dakota Century Code and board action on March 4th, 2025, the attached notice of the board's intent to consider the petition was posted in each school on March 5th, 2025. Under an additional North Dakota Century Code, if any organization had an interest in representing a group of administrators and wished to contest the claim of representation made in the petition, the contesting organization had to file within the Grand Forks School Board a petition containing a written statement of the contest, together with substantiating evidence within 10 days of the date of which the board posted the notice of intent to consider the original petition. No contesting petition has been received. Next, and no sooner than 10 nor later than 20 days after posting the notice of intent to consider the petition, the board shall investigate the petition, determine the question of representation, and post notice of its determination in each school wherein the members of the negotiating unit are employed. And finally, if the petition is not contested, the board shall recognize the petitioner as the representative organization of the negotiating unit unless the board rejects the petition for recognition of the negotiating unit under Section 15.1-16-10, or the board finds in good faith that there is reasonable doubt the representation exists. In light of no contest, the administrative recommendation is that the school board approve the petition and recognize the Grand Forks Education Association as the representative organization for the appropriate negotiating unit per North Dakota Century Code 15.1-16-11, parenthetically 1F.
Questions for Dr. Brenner? Mr. Larson, do you have anything?
No questions.
I would seek a motion to approve the petition and recognize the GFEA as the representative organization for the appropriate negotiating unit.
So moved.
It's been moved by Mr. Clevin. Is there a second? A second by Mr. Manley. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Manley?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Hodak?
Yes.
Clevin?
Yes.
Larson?
Yes.
Palmesino? Flynn is absent. Lund?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. 6F, consideration of petition of Grand Forks Principals Association as appropriate negotiating unit. Dr. Brent.
Thank you. On February 10th, 2025, the board acted to accept a petition for recognition of appropriate negotiating unit as submitted by the Grand Forks Principals Association, otherwise known as GFPA. The only difference between this document and the previous one is on February 28th, 2025, we received the petition with the signatures. So moving all the way down to the final paragraph, in light of no contest because nobody contested it, the administrative recommendation is that the school board approve the petition and recognize the Grand Forks Principals Association as the representative organization for the appropriate negotiating unit as per, the North Dakota Century Code that's listed there.
It's been moved by Dr. Lund. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Anderson. Any discussion? Mr. Larson?
Move to approve.
We'll take a roll call vote.
Lund,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Flynn is absent. Anderson,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Hodak,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. We have 6G, consideration of petition and recognition of Grand Forks Directors Association as representative organization for negotiating unit. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you again. On February 10th, 2025, the board acted to accept the petition for recognition of appropriate negotiating unit as submitted by the Grand Forks Directors Association, otherwise known as GFDA. On February 28th, 2025, they did submit that with their signatures. So moving all the way down to the final paragraph, in light of no contest, the administrative recommendation is that the school board approve the petition and recognize the Grand Forks Directors Association as the representative organization for the appropriate negotiating group as per North Dakota Century Code.
Questions for Dr. Brenner? Seek a motion to approve the petition and recognize the GFDA as the representative organization. It's been moved by Mr. Anderson, second by Mr. Palmesino. Any discussion? Mr. Larson?
None.
We'll take a roll call vote.
Hodak,
Yes.
Clevin,
Yes.
Manley,
Yes.
Larson,
Yes.
Flynn is absent. Lund,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Palmesino,
Yes.
Berger,
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes. 6H, consideration of transportation routing software and student ridership tracking proposals. Mr. Elwine.
Thank you, President Berger. As we've gone through and we've discussed the safety and security of our district, one thing that continually came up was we don't have a good way to track what students are on buses. We don't have a complete way of streamlining communication with parents, and we don't have a way for the bus drivers to see our students getting on the bus, the right bus. Are they getting on the right stop? Are they getting off the right stop? So through these conversations, we worked with stakeholders at the building level. We worked with administration. We worked with the district at the district level, and we came up with a list of priorities and things we wanted to see in a software solution. Through that, we talked to four different vendors and quickly found out we were going to be above that threshold where we need to go out for bids. So Mr. Baumbach worked and he put out a request for proposals for these software applications. As you can see in the board document, he outlines that we wanted routing capabilities, RFID to improve parental communication, anticipate bus arrival, and to have automatic and immediate awareness if a student is on the wrong bus. So through this process, we got six companies submitted packets, and we went through with myself, and I have a few of our other experts here today that were on the committee, and Brandon, as well as some members from Valley Bus to make sure that they would work with their systems. And we created a rubric and scored them and came up with having Tyler Technology as the most responsible bidder. Now, they weren't the lowest bidder, but there were some other considerations, one of them being Tyler Technology has unprecedented language capabilities. They can do almost any language we ask them to do, whereas the most any other had was 3. And another piece is, I'm not quite sure how it works, maybe Ms. Rodriguez can explain it better, but this will also replace another piece of software that we use within her department. So in addition to that, we worked with CI Solutions to provide an RFID badge, which will be a student ID for all students in the district. So that will allow students to have that student ID. They'll badge in, badge out on the bus, but we don't see it as just for students that ride the bus. We see this as a more holistic thing, and this is something that will touch every single family, and even with the busing, touch a lot of families with this specific move. There may be other capabilities in the future, but at this point, we're only looking for it for a pictorial representation on ID, and B, essentially a bus pass. So between those two, the administrative recommendation is to select Tyler Technology as the vendor of choice, as well as CI Solutions for the badges, and to pay for both of these out of Fund 41. And just a reminder, Fund 41 is our referendum fund, which we would see this as connected to the safety and security referendum. I'd stand for any questions. I'll answer those I can, but I'll call on the others if I can't.
Any questions for Mr. Elwine? Yeah, Dr. Lund?
Just a quick one. Are some of those other applications potentially getting into sporting events or even using it for like lunch money or things like that down the road? The badges.
Possibly. We had high level discussions, but that was really more outside of my purview. Mine was really more directly related to transportation.
And just for the record and for those viewing online, we have a couple members of the committee nodding in the background. I don't know if either or any one of you want to come up and at least we have the ability to see you, but there are plenty who are watching or may watch. So could I convince you to come up together and perhaps just speak briefly to that as well as anything else that may come up? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll step aside and let the experts answer.
Well, not experts. I'm Hannah Rose Rodriguez, for those that don't know. I'm our IT application specialist as of about November. And then we're working together with Allie. The application we had talked about earlier that was saving some money is our current online your area search that we use right now. If we go through Tyler Technology and this program, we'll be able to utilize that together. Brandon thought that would save us about $15,000 a year to move from the current frontline program to do into Tyler Technology. And then, what was the other question? Yes, down the road, we've talked about those ID cards doing other things. It is fully capable for all the entities that we have right now, lunch, library, all the way down to checking in and out at the high schools if we went that far, with attendance. Obviously, the busing capability. I'm if you're forgetting anything else. Yeah, we talked about potentially even like, this would be years down, but even activity events, like My School Bucks will link right away, so your lunch money, but the student ID cards that we have, those activity passes that are paper and we lose them all the time, and we have to repay for them, we wouldn't have to do that. So, and we do have a plan in place to recoup some of that money for lost cards, replaced cards, stuff like that, so off some of that if we need to.
Yeah. Thank you. If you would just stay right up there might be another question or two. It's just helpful, I think, for the public who might check in and be curious. I don't know how many have stuck with us for 3.5 hours, but some people may just scroll right to this conversation, so it's helpful to have you. Any other questions from board members? Mr. Larson, for the last and final time.
Nothing from me. I like this. This is good. Thanks.
I just have a couple of comments. This checks all of the boxes for me. I looked at the scoring matrix and so glad that you put this in the board packet. Also so glad that yes, watching dollars is important, but this company, you look at every single category and they were the top or tied for the top and just hitting all of those aspects, is ready to go by this fall. It's absolutely an extension of safety and security. These buses are a rolling campus and we have to protect these kiddos. So this is just a win all the way around. And that's the last thing I have. I would seek a motion to approve. Let me make sure I get the wording correct. I gotta find the right page. I would seek, the administrative recommendation is to select Tyler Technology as the vendor of choice to provide software used in routing and tracking student ridership on school buses, as well as to pay for this, the quote in your packet, and the CI Solution student ID quote out of Fund 41. It's been moved by Dr. Hodak. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Palmasino. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote.
Flynn is absent. Hodak?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Manley?
Yes.
Lund?
Yes.
Clevin?
Yep.
Palmasino?
Yes.
Larson?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
8 yes, 0 no, 1 absent.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you all. On to 7A, announcements. It's late, Dr. Lund says. So I'll be brief. It is board member Mr. Larson's birthday today, so happy birthday, and thank you for spending most of it with us. Any board requests for future consideration? Yes, Dr. Lund.
Just one quick one. I'm wondering why a lowly school board has to record every single vote that they ever make, but a high legislature can vote secretly and not announce how they voted on certain things. I find it embarrassing and ridiculous. I'm just curious how that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clevin?
I think, well, no, I'll refrain my private thoughts to my own private mind.
Any other board requests for future consideration? 7C, school board meeting norms. Dr. Hodak, how did we do?
I think we did very well, except beyond time, we did as well as we could.
I think what you might be referring to is the stated rough idea of the timeline for conversation. We didn't start late necessarily.
Right.
Okay, just to clarify.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about starting, I was clarifying that we needed the time. And I can't imagine who's putting those times on here and how difficult that must be if you're throwing up the coin and saying, okay, heads it's an hour.
Yes.
Tails it's
Yes.
the good word. I think we did great.
Thank you. We are adjourned.